When was the last time you unwrapped a sandwich and the smell alone took you back to somebody's kitchen? There were sandwiches in this country that entire neighborhoods ate every single week, and then one generation stopped making them and they were gone. Not because they were bad, because the person who made them was gone, and nobody thought to ask how they made it. Some of these were so simple they barely counted as cooking. Bread, one thing from the icebox, maybe a smear of something from a jar, and that was lunch for a decade. Others were regional staples that diners and lunch counters served by the hundreds until the places themselves shut down. One sandwich on this list was a payday tradition for an entire generation of mill workers. Another one kept turning up in church cookbooks for 40 years and then disappeared without a trace. 100 sandwiches that faded out of American life, starting with number 100. Number 24. The tongue sandwich. Beef tongue, boiled for hours until the outer skin peeled away, sliced thin, and laid on rye bread with mustard. This was a deli staple from the 1920s through the 1960s, especially in Jewish delicatessens in New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia. Tongue was cheap because most shoppers walked right past it at the butcher counter. The texture was dense and smooth, closer to roast beef than anything else in the case, and the flavor was richer than cuts that cost 3 times as much. It disappeared from most menus, not because the taste changed, but because a generation grew up that could not get past the name. Number 16. Tuna melt. A short-order rail one hot afternoon in 1959 tipped a bowl of tuna salad onto a half-grilled cheese sandwich and decided to keep going. The whole thing got pressed flat on the griddle and slid onto the plate. The customer asked for another. Within 3 years, the tuna melt was on lunch rails everywhere. Tuna salad on rye or sourdough, a single slice of cheese on top, a slick of butter on the griddle, heavy press for roughly 2 minutes each side. The cheese melted down into the tuna, the bread browned, the whole thing came off hot and a little messy. The fast food kitchens replaced the press with a panini machine, and the panini machine turned the tuna melt into something tighter and drier and entirely less interesting than the original. By the way, if any of these sandwiches sound like one your mother used to fix at home, I put together a recipe guide that walks through more like them. The proportions, the bread choices, the right way to cut a sandwich on the diagonal, and the small kitchen tricks the counter cooks use to keep the lettuce crisp and the bacon hot through a 6-hour shift. The link is just below. Fried potatoes on bread were the kind of sandwich that made you feel like you had stumbled into a diner, even when you were sitting at your grandparents' kitchen table. Potatoes were one of the most reliable foods around, cheap, filling, and always ready to become something comforting. Grandparents would slice them thin or cube them small, fry them in a pan until they were crisp on the outside and soft on the inside, and then pile them between slices of warm bread. Sometimes they added a little salt, sometimes a little pepper, and sometimes whatever leftover fat they had in the pan to give it that extra restaurant flair. It was simple, but it ate like a full meal. The sandwich was heavy in the best way, warm, golden, and satisfying from the first bite to the last. You could hear the potatoes sizzling long before you sat down, and that sound alone told you that something good was coming your way. This was the kind of food that filled your stomach and your memory at the same time. It tasted like early mornings, like long afternoons, like comfort without cost. Grandparents understood that potatoes could be transformed into a dozen different meals, but this one always felt special. It had that diner-style nostalgia, that roadside cafe charm, even though it was made with nothing but potatoes, bread, and a little bit of time. Fried potato sandwiches were cheap, sure, but they carried a kind of richness you could not put a price on. Number 14. The fried catfish sandwich. The catfish came out of every creek, pond, and river bottom in the hill country. You caught it on a trot line or a cane pole baited with chicken liver, cleaned it on the bank, and carried it home in a bucket. The breading was cornmeal, salt, black pepper, and nothing else. You heated lard in a cast-iron skillet until a pinch of cornmeal sizzled the second it hit the surface, and you laid the fillets in gently because a catfish fillet will fall apart if you handle it rough. The fish fried for about 4 minutes on each side until the cornmeal crust turned dark gold and the meat inside went white and flaky. You set the fillets on a piece of brown paper to drain, then laid them on white bread with a slice of raw onion and a squirt of yellow mustard. The bread went soft against the hot fish, and the cornmeal crust stayed crunchy where it pressed against the onion. Friday nights in the Ozarks and the Tennessee Valley, this was what people ate. Church fish fries served them by the hundreds. Families who lived near water ate catfish sandwiches twice a week because the fish was free and the cornmeal cost next to nothing. The combination of free protein and penny cornmeal made the fried catfish sandwich one of the most economical meals in the rural South. Commercial catfish farming changed everything in the 1980s. Farm-raised catfish tastes milder, cleaner, and nothing like the wild mud cat that made these sandwiches what they were. People who remember pulling a channel cat off a trot line at dawn and eating it fried on bread by noon know there is no substitute. But decades before sardines and liverwurst filled factory lunchboxes, another kind of working lunch was holding its own in southeastern Massachusetts. The chow mein sandwich came out of Fall River in the 20s, where Chinese restaurant owners married crispy fried noodles with celery, bean sprouts, and shredded pork, smothered the whole thing in brown gravy, and stuffed it into a hamburger bun. It was carbs on carbs, noodles inside bread, and the textile workers who ate them at lunch counters didn't blink. Howard Johnson's picked it up. School cafeterias in Providence served it on Fridays during Lent, when Catholic families needed something filling. The gravy soaked through the bun in minutes, turning the bottom half into something you ate with a fork, and the flavor, salty, savory, faintly sweet from the bean sprouts, was worth the mess. Outside New England, almost nobody has heard of it. Inside Fall River, a handful of Chinese restaurants still serve them, each one a quiet monument to the cooks who figured out how to feed a mill town. Celery, leaf, and mayonnaise sandwiches showed the frugality of 1950s kitchens where nothing was wasted. Celery stalks were often used for cooking, but the leaves, which many might throw away today, became a valuable part of thrifty meals. Housewives would chop the leaves finely, stir them into mayonnaise, and spread the mixture generously across bread slices. The flavor was bright and slightly bitter, balanced by the creaminess of the mayo. It was not fancy, but it offered crunch and freshness when vegetables were scarce. This sandwich carried pride because it proved how resourceful a homemaker could be, feeding her family with what others would call scraps. Served cold, it made for a quick lunch that carried a surprising burst of green flavor. It fit perfectly into the mentality of stretching every ingredient as far as it could go. Celery leaf and mayonnaise sandwiches are nearly forgotten today, but in the 1950s they were both practical and symbolic of the determination not to waste. For those who grew up eating them, they carried the taste of survival and careful economy. The French dip at home arrived in suburban kitchens in the early 1960s and stayed through the 70s as something that seemed fancier than it was. Cole's Restaurant and Philippe's, both in Los Angeles, have argued since 1918 about who first dropped a bun into pan drippings and called it lunch. But the genius was the cup of warm au jus beside the sandwich, turning eating into a ritual-requiring technique. At home, thin-sliced deli roast beef, broth simmered with garlic and a bay leaf, crusty Italian bread, provolone under the broiler for 3 minutes. The dipping cup was just a coffee mug. Children who grew up with these sandwiches learned the correct procedure, a quick drag through the au jus, not a soak. The bread should still have resistance when you bit it. The ones who soaked were corrected. That small instruction, passed at the dinner table, is the kind of knowledge that goes quiet with the people who held it. Of all the sandwiches that disappeared, prune butter might be the one that deserved a better reputation. Stewed prunes mashed into a dark, sticky paste and spread across day-old bread. That was a school lunch in the 40s and 50s, packed by mothers who knew dried fruit was cheap, filling, and wouldn't spoil in a tin pail. Some added cinnamon or a smear of butter to soften the intensity. Some mixed in chopped walnuts for texture. The result was dense and sweet, almost like jam, but earthier, with a chewiness that made it feel like real food instead of candy. Kids traded these away at the cafeteria table faster than anything else in the lunchbox. Prune had already become a punchline by the 50s, and no child wanted to be caught eating one. The mothers who packed them knew the nutritional value and didn't care about the jokes. They were feeding their kids on pennies. The kids who threw them away wished now they'd paid attention. Ribbon sandwiches looked like something from a dollhouse tea party, but they came from a place of real effort. Thin slices of bread were stacked in layers, each with a different filling, maybe egg salad, then ham spread, then cream cheese and olives. Sometimes the bread colors alternated too: white, wheat, rye, stacked in neat rectangles and trimmed of crusts. When sliced, they revealed pastel stripes like a surprise inside. They took time. They took care. And they were usually made by someone who wanted the table to feel special. You found them at showers, receptions, and the occasional work luncheon. They were not filling. They were not practical. But they said something else. They said someone went the extra step. Someone chose charm over calories. For working men, these sandwiches might have appeared only on holidays or community events, but when they did, they left a mark. You might not remember the speech or the decorations, but you remembered the sandwich that looked like a checkerboard. A reminder that even simple ingredients, arranged with love, could feel fancy. The apple and mayo sandwich might seem like a strange combination, but it was a surprisingly popular choice during tough times when ingredients were scarce and creativity in the kitchen was key. Sliced apples, typically tart varieties, were paired with creamy mayonnaise between slices of bread. The sweetness of the apples contrasted with the rich, tangy mayo, creating a unique and unexpected flavor profile. It wasn't the type of sandwich you would find in any deli, but it became a go-to option for those looking for something quick and different. The apples, which were relatively inexpensive and often readily available, provided a bit of freshness and texture, while the mayo added a comforting creaminess that tied the whole thing together. The apple and mayo sandwich was especially popular during times of rationing or when fresh produce was hard to come by, offering a rare chance to enjoy a sweet, crunchy bite. While it wasn't a culinary masterpiece, it was a meal that worked with what was available, perfect for those on tight budgets. The sandwich wasn't fancy, but it had an undeniable charm. For many, it was an odd but delicious treat that felt like a luxury in a world where simple ingredients were used to make the most of every meal. And if you thought the apple and mayo sandwich was unexpected, just wait until the next sandwich, where another quirky combination takes center stage with a surprising flavor twist. Deli classics have always been Graham's specialty, and the corned beef sandwich was no exception. This one started out as a nod to the traditions of Eastern European cuisine and became popular in the United States in the early 20th century. In case you're wondering about the name, corned beef comes from the curing process. Corned refers to the large grains of salt that are used to preserve the meat. This was a pretty simple beef sandwich with a hint of mustard, but its taste really spoke for itself. And it even made its way into pop culture by being frequently featured in TV shows, movies, etc. For example, in the film The Godfather, there's a memorable scene where a character is shown eating a corned beef sandwich. If you've seen the movie, I'm sure you remember it. Wild rice cake sandwiches with duck were sticky, rich, and deeply satisfying. Meals built near lakes, cooked over fire, and eaten with reverence. The rice was hand-harvested by canoe, soaked and shaped into firm patties, then griddled until crisp on the outside and chewy inside. Duck meat, usually smoked or slow-roasted, went between them. No sauce needed. The fat from the duck seeped into the rice, making each bite earthy, oily, and full of depth. These were celebration foods and everyday lunches rolled into one. The sandwich was portable, delicious, and deeply tied to the rhythms of water and migration. Wild rice still exists, but much of it is cultivated and stripped of its ritual. Duck is a delicacy now, not a staple. Together, they were once food and identity. We have kept the ingredients, but not the reason. Can you taste the difference when you do not know why it mattered? The club sandwich was never shy about making an entrance. This was the sandwich equivalent of wearing a tuxedo to a barbecue. Triple layered, cut diagonally, and always served with a cocktail toothpick jabbed right through the middle like a victory flag, the classic clubhouse was a masterclass in controlled chaos. You had turkey, ham, and bacon stacked with lettuce, tomato, and mayonnaise on white toast, then doubled up like it had something to prove. One bite, and you got the salty crunch of bacon, the cool snap of lettuce, the savory chew of ham, and that creamy mayo keeping everything glued together. It was tall. It was filling. It was an edible tower of American lunch pride. You could find it at diners, roadside motels, airport cafes, and your Aunt Linda's house on a Sunday afternoon. No one ever finished a club sandwich without looking like they'd just solved a puzzle. Picking it up was half the battle. Eating it cleanly? Impossible. But satisfying? Always. This was the sandwich you ordered when you wanted to feel like you were doing something important. And while this one wore its sandwich royalty crown proudly, the next one took a completely different route, turning cheap lunch meat into the closest thing we ever got to pizza on a bun. During the Great Depression, food scarcity pushed resourcefulness to new heights, turning even backyard weeds into life-saving nourishment. A prime example was the dandelion greens sandwich, made from tender, freshly foraged dandelion greens sautéed briefly in bacon drippings or butter, proving the old adage true: one person's weed is another person's lunch. Dandelions flourished freely, thriving on roadsides and lawns, offering a nutritious, vitamin-rich option readily available to anyone willing to forage. Interestingly, dandelions weren't always considered nuisances. Settlers historically cultivated them for their nutritional value, containing more iron and calcium than many grocery store greens today. During the Depression, families who knew this little fact relied heavily on these wild greens to fill nutritional gaps left by their otherwise sparse meals. With fats like butter or precious bacon drippings in short supply, home cooks learned to carefully ration these staples, just enough to tame the green's natural bitterness. Ironically, modern gardeners battle relentlessly against dandelions with chemicals and lawnmowers, unaware their ancestors would have gladly turned that lawn invasion into supper. The egg and sardine sandwich was an odd mix of hard-boiled eggs mashed with sardines. The sandwich was most popular from 1923 to the 1950s, when sardine alternatives like turkey, bacon, and bologna were not popular. Sardines were affordable, and so the sardine and egg sandwich was a go-to choice for many. The recipe was simple, and easily accessible ingredients were used to create this sandwich. All you needed was 2 nice fluffy eggs whisked until thick if you don't prefer them hard-boiled, and sardines over toasted bread. People would often spice it up with their own choice of vegetables and sauces. Some would even chop up sardines, season them with spices, and dice the eggs with melted cheese to create a combo that sounds a bit outrageous but might be better than you'd think. The sandwich disappeared when the alternatives to sardines became affordable to the common man. Number 21. The bean sandwich. Leftover pinto beans or navy beans mashed with a fork and spread on bread like paste. Some added chopped onion or a spoonful of chili powder. This was a staple in Mexican-American households along the border and in families across the South who cooked dried beans by the potful every week. The mashed beans soaked into the bread and made it heavy and filling, which was the point. A pot of beans cost almost nothing and lasted for days, and the sandwich was how you used the last scraping from the bottom. 2 of these and you were full for hours. It was plain, it was quiet, and it kept people going. The survival sandwich was never meant to be remembered. It had no recipe card, no photograph in a magazine, no place on a restaurant menu. It existed because bread was the cheapest thing in the house, and whatever went between the slices was whatever had not run out yet. Families did not talk about these meals afterward. They were evidence of a week that went wrong, a paycheck that came up short, a season that gave less than expected. But the sandwich did its job. It filled a belly. It got a child through an afternoon. It let a grown person work a full shift without stopping. And when the hard time passed, people put those sandwiches behind them and never spoke of them again, which is exactly why so few survived into the next generation. Number 19. Cottage cheese on date nut bread. Slicing the bread out of a tin can was the strange small ritual at the start. Thomas's and B&M both sold dense, dark, sweet date nut loaves shaped exactly to the can, and the cook sliced thick and never toasted. Cottage cheese went on cold, a generous scoop of small curd, lightly salted, with one thin round of canned pineapple on top. The sandwich was strange and beautiful, like an afternoon dressed up just enough to feel like an event you had not earned but were grateful for. You could order it at Schraft's with a glass of iced tea, and the waitress would set it down on a paper doily. It was on every Schraft's menu for 20 years, and it disappeared the year Schraft's itself began to close stores. The date nut bread in a can went out of production at B&M in 1992. Women in their 80s still remember the exact taste, and there is no place left that will make it for them. Onion sandwiches were proof that you did not need much to make something stick with you, and grandparents understood that better than anyone. They would boil eggs the way only older hands know how, never cracking and always perfectly tender. Then came the onions, diced sharp and small enough to blend into the mix, but bold enough to give the sandwich its signature kick. Add a spoonful of mayonnaise or a tiny splash of vinegar, and suddenly you had the kind of filling that could feed a whole table without anyone feeling shortchanged. Grandparents scooped the mixture onto soft bread with a seriousness that made you think you were eating something far fancier. The sandwich had the creaminess of a corner deli order and the bite of something crafted by someone who knew how to stretch every ingredient. Maybe it was the onion that made it feel grown up, or the eggs that made it feel comforting, or the way grandparents piled it on thick. Whatever the reason, it tasted far bigger than its small cost. Egg and onion sandwiches were quiet generosity served between two slices of bread. Tomato. Number 12, the cold biscuit and country ham. Country ham was salt-cured and smoked, and a whole ham hung in the smokehouse for months before anyone touched it. You sliced it thin, and if you were eating it hot, you fried it in a skillet and made red-eye gravy from the drippings. But the cold version was its own thing entirely. You took a leftover biscuit from breakfast, split it open, and laid a thin slice of uncooked country ham right on the bread. The salt in the ham was intense, almost sharp, and the cold biscuit was dense and firm from sitting on the counter since morning. Field workers in Virginia and Kentucky carried these in their coat pockets wrapped in a piece of cloth. The salt preserved the ham without refrigeration, and the biscuit held together no matter how rough the day got. It was portable, durable, and filling, and it tasted like smoke and salt and the place you came from. Underwood deviled ham came in a flat tin with a red devil on the label, the oldest trademarked food product in America, stamped with that little pitchfork since 1868. The meat inside was ground so fine it was almost a paste, salty and smoky and spreadable with a butter knife, and you either loved it or you pretended it didn't exist. The old-timers mixed it with sweet pickle relish and a dab of mustard, spread it on soft white bread, and called it lunch. Children who opened their lunch boxes to find one either traded it fast or ate it in 2 bites before anyone could comment. The genius of the can was that it kept forever, cost next to nothing, and didn't require refrigeration until you cracked it open. For families feeding 5 or 6 on a shift worker's pay, that little red devil did more work than any filet mignon ever could. Nobody talks about deviled ham anymore, but the cans are still there on the bottom shelf, waiting for someone to remember. Powdered milk spread sandwiches reflected the struggles of homes that relied on powdered milk as a staple during lean years. Housewives would reconstitute the powder with water, stir in sugar or syrup, and create a sweet paste that could be spread onto bread. It was not glamorous, but it was filling and provided children with energy when other options were scarce. Powdered milk was cheaper than fresh milk and lasted longer in the pantry, making it a dependable ingredient. The spread was creamy, lightly sweet, and easy to prepare, though it never replaced the taste of real butter or cheese. For families with little money, it was better than going without. Children often saw it as a treat because of the added sweetness, while mothers saw it as survival. This sandwich carried the memory of thrift and resilience, showing how much homemakers relied on creativity to keep everyone fed. Powdered milk spread sandwiches have been forgotten, but they remain a quiet testament to making do with very little. You couldn't make a loose meat sandwich by accident. You had to know why the meat was supposed to fall apart. Fred Angel opened the first Maid-Rite in Muscatine, Iowa in 1926. Seasoned ground beef cooked slow in beef broth until the liquid was almost gone. Not a patty, not sauced like a sloppy Joe, just loose, crumbly beef spooned onto a steamed bun with yellow mustard and dill pickles. No sauce, no ketchup. The meat was the thing, and the thing about it was restraint, a philosophy that spread across Iowa and into surrounding states through the 1960s and 70s, showing up at high school cafeterias for a quarter and church basements on Friday nights. If you had to ask what held the sandwich together, the answer was nothing. That was the point. The smell of a cheese dream coming out of the oven could fill a whole house. Sharp cheddar bubbling over toasted white bread, the faint char of tomato sauce underneath turning sweet in the heat. Cheese dreams were the Depression-era answer to Feeding Company when the pantry was bare. A 1932 San Jose News article called them the newest favorite sandwich, though Good Housekeeping had featured them by 1918 as a luncheon dish. The recipe was simple: bread, butter, a thick slab of cheese, mustard, and cayenne, browned on both sides or slid under the broiler until the cheese pooled and crisped. Some added a tomato slice or bacon if the household could manage, served with olives on the side because even cheap suppers deserved presentation. They called them dreams because cheese on bread was as close to luxury as most families got. The grilled cheese replaced it and erased the name. The Elvis sandwich is more than just a quirky snack. It's a piece of pop culture history. Legend has it, Elvis Presley adored this decadent combination: peanut butter, ripe banana, and crispy bacon layered between slices of white bread. Some say it must be pan-fried in butter until golden and melty. Others swear by the raw version, eaten cold in the dead of night. Either way, it's not exactly health food, it's more of a fever dream. This sandwich is sweet, salty, creamy, and crunchy all at once, much like the king himself. It became a symbol of indulgence, a recipe so outrageous it could only belong to someone larger than life. Fans have recreated it for decades, sometimes adding honey, sometimes toasting it, but always treating it like an edible homage. It's not just about flavor, it's about nostalgia, rebellion, and letting your taste buds run wild. The Elvis sandwich is one of those rare things you try once as a joke and then crave when nobody's watching. Just don't ask your doctor what they think about it. The making meals stretch further. The sloppy cornbread sandwich was a masterclass in using leftovers creatively. Crumbled cornbread, often from the night before, was paired with whatever stew, beans, or gravy was left over. The key was taking what was already cooked and giving it a second life in sandwich form. The cornbread soaked up all the savory goodness from the stew or beans, making each bite rich and flavorful. It wasn't pretty, but it was hearty and filling, perfect for when there wasn't enough time or money to cook something new. This sandwich was a clever way to use up those last bits of food, and it was satisfying enough to keep people going for the rest of the day. It wasn't the kind of sandwich you'd find in a fancy restaurant, but it worked wonders for anyone looking to get the most out of their meals. But if you think cornbread and beans are a great combo, just wait until you discover the next sandwich. Speaking of meaty sandwiches, the Turkey Club sandwich was another fan favorite. Now, this one was known for its 3 layers of bread, which made it stand out from the rest of the sandwiches on the table. The club sandwich has its roots in American culinary history, with some sources suggesting it was first served in private social clubs in the late 19th century. By the time Grandma was making them, it had already become the talk of the town. Graham often made this one the day after Thanksgiving when there was no shortage of leftover roast turkey in the refrigerator. The key ingredient in this sandwich was crispy bacon, which Graham added to make it kid-friendly and 10 times more delicious. Grandma's Turkey Club sandwich was often cut in quarters or halves, which made it easier to eat, and this was the first time sandwiches were cut diagonally. And remember the toothpicks Graham used to hold it together with colorful cellophane frills? Brings back memories, doesn't it? Elk jerky sliders on cedar buns were winter food with a scent you never forgot. Meaty, smoky, and soaked in the aroma of trees. This was not just lunch, this was ceremony. Elk jerky, cut thick and dried slow, was a prized food in the colder regions. When times were good, it got layered into small cedar-smoked buns made from flour mixed with bark ash or fir tips. Served at winter gatherings, these sliders were eaten cold or warm, sometimes dipped in broth or spiced oil. The cedar buns were not just flavor, they were preservative, story, and smoke all at once. The sandwich gave energy, preserved meat, and honored the animal. Today, jerky is processed and peppered with artificial sweeteners. The cedar has vanished, and so has the meaning. We made the meat last, but not the memory. What used to keep people alive through months of snow now lives in glass jars at gourmet stores. We call it rustic. We call it old-fashioned. But the people who made it were not trying to be cute. They were surviving. Can we even still taste the difference between survival and snack food? Now, bologna is not what you would call glamorous. But in the 1970s, someone took that humble meat and turned it into a straight-up miracle. Enter the bologna pizza sandwich. This was not a joke. It was genius. You start with a soft hamburger bun, maybe left over from the weekend cookout. On the bottom half, you lay down a slice of bologna, and if you are doing it right, you give it a quick sizzle in a frying pan so the edges curl up like a little meatball. Then you spoon on tomato sauce, canned, homemade, whatever you have, and top it with shredded mozzarella. After that, into the broiler it goes. What comes out is pure nostalgia with melted cheese dripping down the sides and the edges of the bologna just crispy enough to give it bite. It smelled like school lunch and after-school cartoons. This was a sandwich that did not care what anyone thought. It was pizza-inspired, budget-friendly, and full of attitude. A little greasy? Sure. A little weird? Absolutely. But no one ever forgot their first one. But if bologna in a broiler felt like a stretch, get ready for the canned spread that showed up in lunchboxes, picnic baskets, and every pantry with a shelf of shame, and somehow stayed beloved. Shrimp salad rolls were the fancy cousin who only showed up at baby showers and bridal brunches, but when they did, they made sure you noticed. These sandwiches were served cold, creamy, and full of old-school charm. Chopped shrimp got mixed with mayonnaise, a little diced celery for crunch, and maybe a squeeze of lemon juice if the recipe came from someone who read food magazines. The mix got spooned onto a buttered roll, soft, pillowy, and lightly toasted if you were lucky. It was rich but light, simple but elevated. You were not scarfing it down with fries and soda. No, this one came with iced tea in a glass and maybe a napkin folded just right. It was the kind of sandwich that made you sit a little straighter. Perfect for luncheons, community cookbooks, and any moment where finger foods and floral plates were involved. But here is the thing. It was good. Really good. The shrimp brought just enough sweetness. The celery kept it from being too heavy, and the bread soaked it all in without falling apart. It was a sandwich that whispered luxury in a decade where not much else did. And if shrimp salad was for special occasions, the next sandwich took something sacred, Thanksgiving dinner, and made it work any day of the week. Cooked chicken livers mixed with onions and spices came together to create the chicken liver sandwich. Now, out of all the ones on the list, this one has probably stood the test of time the most rigidly. You'll still find it in the odd bistro or cafe here and there. Preparing it is a bit of work, but for those who want to expand their sandwich arsenal, this is a worthy addition. You'll need celery, red onions, curry powder, salt and pepper, and lettuce of your choice. Once you've mixed your meat with your vegetables and spices, it's time to get cooking in a 350-degree skillet and mix well. Once it's all ready, assemble your sandwich and see just why this was so popular around the 1940-1960s. Number 29. The sardine sandwich. A tin of sardines packed in oil, mashed with a fork onto a piece of bread, maybe a squeeze of lemon or a few rings of raw onion on top. This was a working man's lunch in the 1940s and 1950s, especially along the eastern seaboard where canned sardines cost next to nothing. The tin fit in a coat pocket. The bread came from yesterday. You ate it cold on a bench or on the tailgate of a truck, and you did not complain about the smell because everyone around you ate the same thing. Sardines packed more protein percent than almost anything else on the shelf. A man could work a full shift on one sardine sandwich and a thermos of black coffee. Before I go any further, for those of you who have been cooking from these old recipes and want more of them gathered together, I put together the vintage recipe guide. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not bring it up again. If it sounds like something you would use, it is right there. Now, back to the list. Number 21. Banana mayonnaise on white. The first bite tasted wrong and right in the same instant. Sweet banana, salty mayonnaise, soft white bread. The mayonnaise was Duke's. The bananas were green-tipped, sliced thin, laid in a single overlapping layer. A sprinkle of salted peanuts on top when the jar held some. The sandwich was a Southern staple long before the Depression, like so many of the things this country eats without questioning. The bread was buttered on the outside on hot days to keep the slices from going slimy. The lunch counters that served it widely are gone now. The sandwich is still eaten in pockets across the Deep South. Most never try it. They are missing something honest. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches were the closest thing to dessert you could get without anyone calling it dessert. Grandparents mashed the banana until it blended into the peanut butter, making this sweet, velvety spread that could brighten even the plainest slice of bread. It was cheap, filling, and tasted like something that should have come from a bakery instead of a quiet kitchen. Sometimes they warmed the banana or toasted the bread just enough to make everything melt together in that gooey, comforting way that stayed with you. It was a sandwich that tasted like effort, even though it cost almost nothing. Grandparents knew how to turn 3 ingredients into something that felt special, and this sandwich was proof. It reminded you of slow afternoons and simple comforts that feel distant now. Maybe that is why people still crave it today. Grandparents did not measure or follow rules. They just mashed, stirred, and spread until it felt right. And somehow, it always was. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches were a treat disguised as lunch, a bit of love disguised as food. Number 16. Streak-o-lean on white bread. Streak-o-lean was the cheap cut of salt-cured pork belly that ran more fat than meat, just thin streaks of lean running through thick layers of white. You sliced it, fried it slow in its own grease until the edges curled and crisped, and laid it on a piece of white bread. The bread soaked up the drippings and went soft and almost translucent where the grease touched it. This was a supper sandwich in rural Georgia, Alabama, and the Carolina Piedmont, where streak-o-lean cost half what bacon cost and lasted twice as long in the smokehouse. It was saltier than bacon and fattier than side meat, and people who grew up eating it will tell you it tasted better than both of them put together. You could argue that every sandwich on this list was born from the same arithmetic. Take what you have, divide it by the number of mouths at the table, and figure out how to make the answer feel like enough. That is not a recipe. That is survival math, and the women who ran it in their heads every day did not call it that. They called it Tuesday. They called it getting by. The hillbilly sandwich was never meant to impress anybody. It was meant to solve a problem that showed up 3 times a day, every single day, for decades. The fact that some of them tasted extraordinary was almost accidental. Flavor was a byproduct of necessity, not the goal. The goal was another day where everybody ate. If the cream cheese and walnut sandwich was a quiet act of precision, the frosted ribbon loaf was the showpiece it was building toward. The Better Homes and Gardens new cookbook printed the recipe in 1973, but the dish had circulated through bridal showers and baby showers since the late 40s. You took an unsliced loaf of white bread, trimmed the crusts, cut it into horizontal layers like a cake, and filled each layer with a different spread. Ham salad, egg salad, pimiento cheese, deviled ham with pickle. Then you frosted the whole thing in whipped cream cheese tinted pastel pink or green, chilled it until firm, and sliced it at the table. The gasps were the point. It looked like a cake and ate like a sandwich, and the woman who carried it in had spent the previous evening assembling it in silence while her family slept. The Swedish called theirs smörgåstårta and still make it for midsummer. Here, it faded with the last generation of women who considered a layered sandwich a competitive sport. Green pepper and egg sandwiches were the kind of filler meals that kept households going during lean stretches. Eggs were one of the most reliable protein sources, but even they had to be stretched when rationing or shortages hit. Housewives scrambled eggs with diced green peppers, bulking them up to serve more mouths without using as many eggs. The peppers added crunch, freshness, and a hint of bitterness, which balanced the creamy eggs. Spread onto bread, this combination became a hearty sandwich that worked for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It was simple enough for children to enjoy, but hearty enough for working men needing energy for long shifts. Green peppers were affordable, especially in summer gardens, and pairing them with eggs created a balance of thrift and flavor. This sandwich showed how resourcefulness could turn two basic ingredients into a satisfying meal. Today, it might feel old-fashioned, but in the 1950s it was a staple for families stretching every bite. If you grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, you know what an egg foo young sandwich is. If you grew up anywhere else, you've never heard of it. An egg foo young patty, eggs beaten with bean sprouts, scallions, and pork, pan-fried in a loose disc, between two slices of white bread with mayonnaise, lettuce, and dill pickles, a combination that should not have worked but absolutely did. The sandwich took root in St. Louis in the 1940s when Chinese-American restaurants began adapting for Midwestern customers who wanted familiar flavors in portable form. The briny pickle against the savory egg was the whole argument for its existence. By the 1970s, it was a fixture at old-school St. Louis lunch counters, surviving into the 80s before gradually fading. A handful of establishments still make it today. Everywhere else, it simply never happened. A community's gift to its neighbors that never reached the rest of the country. Before the Denver omelet ruled breakfast menus, there was the Denver sandwich, scrambled eggs with diced ham, green pepper, and onion, pressed between two slices of bread and eaten for lunch at diners from Colorado to the East Coast. Railroad workers supposedly created it as a portable meal, named after the city where it gained traction in the early 1900s. By the 40s and 50s, it was a lunch counter standard, cheap, filling, hot, and assembled in minutes by short-order cooks who could crack eggs with one hand while flipping the ham with the other. The sandwich version disappeared by the 70s, though nobody can explain exactly why. The open-faced breakfast version survived, the omelet survived, but the simple act of putting that filling between bread slices, the thing that made it a working lunch instead of a sit-down breakfast, vanished. Something about the speed of those lunch counter cooks, the sizzle of the griddle, the way they slid the plate across the counter without looking, that rhythm is gone now too. The pimento cheese sandwich is a Southern tradition that spread like wildfire through cafeterias, picnics, and family reunions. The filling, a creamy, tangy blend of shredded cheese, mayonnaise, and diced pimentos, was made by the bowlful and kept in the fridge for whenever company came over. On soft white bread, it was the perfect blend of smooth and savory, with a little kick if you added pepper or hot sauce. Some versions came grilled, others were left cold, served with chips or sweet tea on the side. At its heart, it was an inexpensive way to feel fancy. Somewhere between a spread and a dip, it clung to its bread like glue, and nobody minded. For many, it tasted like church potlucks, backyard folding tables, and long afternoons under the fan. In certain households, it wasn't just a sandwich, it was a rite of passage, handed down in recipes scribbled on index cards with mayonnaise stains. You don't just eat a pimento cheese sandwich, you remember it. For many families, the cornbread and molasses sandwich was a nostalgic, soul-satisfying meal. This humble sandwich takes us back to the Appalachian table, where cornbread was a daily staple, especially when times were tough. Cornbread, often considered a basic but hearty food, was a versatile option when money was scarce. If the cornbread was a little stale or leftover, all the better. It was perfect for slathering with rich molasses, which was often a pantry staple in many homes. The molasses added a rich sweetness that made the sandwich not just filling but comforting in its simplicity. Sometimes a little butter was added for extra indulgence, giving the bread a velvety texture that made each bite even more satisfying. While it might not have been a gourmet creation, it was a connection to simpler times when families used what they had and made do. Cornbread was cheap and easy to make, and molasses was an affordable sweetener. The combination of the hearty cornbread and the sweet molasses made it the perfect meal when the cupboard was bare. For many, it was a meal that provided both physical and emotional comfort. Nothing fancy, but it worked. It wasn't about the ingredients being luxurious. It was about making the most of what was available and taking pride in the simplicity of the dish. This sandwich wasn't just a meal. It was a reminder of resourcefulness, tradition, and making do with less. So, this next sandwich is also typically made from only 3 ingredients, but it's still one of Grandma's most iconic creations. I'm talking about the infamous BLT sandwich. The name is an abbreviation for the ingredients: bacon, lettuce, and tomato. This sandwich was a summertime favorite, especially when tomatoes were at their ripest in Graham's garden. The BLT's roots can be traced back to tea sandwiches served in the late 19th century, but it wasn't until World War II when it gained popularity. During this time, supermarkets made bacon, lettuce, and tomatoes more widely available all year round, and Grandma made sure to use them up in the kitchen. A classic BLT is often made with mayonnaise, but some purists argue that the sandwich should be spread with butter instead. Well, it's still up for debate, so make sure to let us know your take on it in the comments. Turkey and cranberry pemmican sandwiches were the original trail mix meets Thanksgiving dinner. Dried shreds of wild turkey were pounded with rendered fat and tart cranberries, then pressed into dense cakes or layered inside split cornbread pouches. This was not a meal made for pleasure, it was made for endurance. But somehow, the sweet-savory combination felt familiar, even warm. Carried during northeastern winters, this portable power food was eaten during hunts, travels, or times when game was scarce and the snow ran deep. Sometimes additional nuts or seeds were mixed in, and when cornbread was on hand, it became a sandwich, dense, chewy, and surprisingly rich. It didn't need refrigeration, it didn't spoil quickly, and it held the memory of autumn feasts long after the season had passed. Today, pemmican is known mostly among survivalists and historians, but this specific turkey and cranberry version was once common in the colder woodland regions. It's strange to think a meal this ancient tastes so much like the holidays, but maybe that's the point. It held on to warmth when everything else had frozen. Cheese and tomato sandwiches were summer stacked between 2 slices of bread. Simple, juicy, and just the right kind of messy. A slice or two of cheddar or American cheese laid over ripe tomato slices, sometimes with a little salt, sometimes with mayonnaise, sometimes grilled until everything melted into something golden. But even cold, it worked. The acidity of the tomato, the smooth melt of the cheese. It was balance, it was brightness. It was a sandwich that never tried to be more than it was, and that is exactly why it worked. Some kids had it toasted, crusts crisp and corners dark. Others ate it fresh, just a quick assembly before the morning bell rang. Cheese and tomato was one of those sandwiches that looked like it came together in 5 minutes, but tasted like it had been passed down for generations. Today, it still shows up in cafes and comfort food menus, but for those who grew up with it in their lunchboxes, it is something more. It is summer in a sandwich, a reminder that even the simplest things can be perfect. Now this one had drama. The tuna boat melt was not just a sandwich, it was an event. You start with a sub roll, soft in the middle, split open like it is waiting for a miracle. In goes a scoop of tuna salad, but not the watery kind. This was chunky, mayo-rich, maybe with a little celery if you were lucky. Then come the tomato slices, thin, juicy, and laid down like armor. And finally, cheddar cheese, shredded, sliced, whatever worked, blanketing the whole thing like a warm hug. Slide the whole sandwich under a broiler and wait. That is the moment things change. The edges of the bread crisp up, the cheese bubbles and browns, and the tomato softens just enough to soak into the tuna. You pull it out just in time to stop it from burning, but almost wish it had. This was the sandwich version of comfort food theater. It smelled like warmth. It looked like golden perfection. It tasted like something way fancier than it was. Parents made it to use up tuna, but kids remembered it like a feast. But if this one was golden, wait until you meet the sandwich that vanished from lunch counters just as fast as it appeared. The head cheese sandwich in basic terms is just slices of head cheese, which is a cold cut made from meat from the head of a calf or pig on bread. If you'd rather not the head, then you can also use trimmings. And in terms of assembly, this resembles more of a charcuterie board than anything else. It's packed to the brim with vegetables, spices, and other aromatics. Though still, the entire head of an animal can be a bit of a daunting task for any chef. Once you've got your bread toasted and your spread spreaded, add your spices and vegetables and the hog's head cheese and assemble accordingly. If you actually manage to pull it off, this is definitely a vintage worth getting your hands dirtier than usual. Number 25. The syrup sandwich. Caro syrup or sorghum molasses poured onto a slice of bread, folded in half, and eaten over the sink because it dripped. In the rural South, this was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes supper. Families who grew their own sorghum had an endless supply. Those who did not could buy a bottle of Caro for next to nothing. The sweetness hit fast and hard, and on an empty stomach it felt like fuel. Some mixed the syrup with a pat of butter and stirred it into a pale golden paste before spreading. That was the fancy version. The plain one, the one dripping down your wrist, was the one people actually ate every day. Number 14. SOS, chipped beef gravy over toast. Soldiers had 3 letters for it, and your grandfather knew all 3. The polite version was, "Save our souls." Every American diner counter ran it on the breakfast menu from 1948 through about 1972. Dried beef, rinsed of salt, simmered in a quick milk and butter gravy that the rail thickened with a pinch of flour, then ladled hot over a stack of buttered white toast. Veterans of the Second World War had eaten the same dish thrice weekly in mess halls overseas, and when they came home, they wanted it on a plate around dawn before the morning shift kicked off. It was 40 cents at a Pittsburgh diner in 1955. The coffee was a dime. The plate came hot, the gravy thick, the beef salty and chewy in a way that woke a man up like a slap on the cheek. A trucker could finish 2 plates and a black coffee in 15 minutes flat and be on the road before sunrise. The dish disappeared as the diners themselves disappeared, as the McDonald's drive-thrus took over the breakfast trade. Your grandfather could still make a perfect one at home. Most cooks under 50 have never heard the name. Cold meatloaf sandwiches were the unsung heroes of leftover night. The kind of meal that made you forget leftovers did not always have to feel like a downgrade. A slice of meatloaf, chilled just enough to hold its shape, was placed between soft bread and topped with mustard, ketchup, or whatever condiments were around. Grandparents knew the trick. Cold meatloaf had flavor that settled in overnight, making every bite taste even better than it did the day before. The sandwich felt like something you would order from a deli, thick, meaty, and packed with flavor that did not need any heating up. It was the definition of cheap food tasting expensive. Grandparents sliced it with the kind of confidence that came from thousands of meals served over a lifetime, and they always knew exactly how thick the slice needed to be to make the sandwich perfect. You would bite into it and suddenly remember how good simple food could be. Cold meatloaf sandwiches were proof that leftovers could shine, that yesterday's dinner could become today's comfort, and that grandparents had a way of making everything feel just a little better with the right touch. Cucumber and cream. Number 19. The apple butter and hot biscuit. Every fall in the Appalachian Hills, families gathered around a copper kettle set over an open fire and stirred apples for hours. The apples cooked down with cinnamon, cloves, and a little sugar until they turned into a thick, dark spread that tasted like autumn had been concentrated into a jar. The stirring was the hard part. You used a long wooden paddle and you never stopped, because if the apple butter scorched on the bottom, the whole batch was ruined. Some families kept the fire going from dawn until after dark. Children took turns with the paddle. Neighbors came over to help and stayed for supper. The apple butter went into mason jars and lined the shelves of the root cellar, and it lasted all winter. When you split a hot biscuit straight from the oven and spread that dark apple butter across the steaming inside, the heat from the biscuit loosened the spices and the whole kitchen smelled like October. It was the simplest sandwich in the world, bread and fruit. But the fruit had been transformed by 12 hours of stirring, and the bread had been made by hand that same morning, and together they carried the weight of an entire season's labor. You could buy apple butter in a jar at the store by the 1970s, but it was not the same. The store version was thinner, sweeter, and missing the smokiness that came from cooking outdoors over hardwood coals. The real thing required a community, a fire, and a full day of work, and that is exactly why it disappeared. Nobody has that kind of time anymore, but the people who remember it will tell you that no sandwich since has tasted half as good. If ham salad was a mother's invention, the cheese and grape jelly sandwich was a child's. Kraft ran recipe cards in the 1960s and 70s, pushing every combination of Velveeta and processed American cheese they could dream up, and somewhere in that golden age of supermarket ingenuity, grape jelly met a slice of cheddar, and nobody looked back. Kids made it themselves. That was half the appeal. 2 slices of white bread, a thick square of cheese peeled from its plastic sleeve, a knife load of Welch's grape, pressed together and eaten over the sink the same way their fathers ate liverwurst. Parents who caught you making one shook their heads but said nothing because the sweet, salty logic of it actually worked. The cheese held its ground against the sugar, the jelly cut through the salt, and for about 3 minutes you had something that tasted like you'd invented it yourself. You hadn't. Every kid on the block already knew. Ketchup sandwiches were the kind of meal that no child forgot, for better or worse. When meat ran out and budgets were stretched thin, a slice of bread slathered with ketchup stood in as lunch or even dinner. Some families used both slices of bread while others folded one slice over to save even more. The tangy sweetness of the ketchup soaked into the bread, making it both soft and messy, but it filled stomachs when little else was available. Packed into lunchboxes, it was often eaten at school by children whose parents had no choice but to make something out of nothing. Housewives knew it was not glamorous, but it provided energy and flavor without cost. In homes where condiments were one of the only things left in the pantry, this sandwich represented survival and resilience. It became a quiet staple of poorer families who had to get creative with what they had on hand. Though rarely spoken of today, ketchup sandwiches reveal how little could be stretched into just enough during lean times. The French bread pizza sandwich, called a stromboli in Indiana, called nothing in dozens of Midwestern kitchens that made it without naming it, lived at the crossroads of the home pizza craze and the Italian sub-tradition in the 1970s. Nazareno Romano had created the original rolled stromboli in 1950 in Essington, Pennsylvania. What arrived in Midwestern home kitchens was simpler. Italian or French bread sliced lengthwise, pizza sauce from a jar, browned Italian sausage, mozzarella from a block, everything under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and the kitchen smelled like a pizza restaurant. Ground sausage at Nick's English Hut in Bloomington, Indiana, became so well known that alumni still talk about it decades later, and the home version followed. It faded when frozen pizza got cheap enough that making it yourself felt unnecessary, and a generation stopped pulling it from the oven with their own hands. In Massachusetts in the 60s, the Fluffernutter got so popular in school cafeterias that the state legislature passed laws limiting how often it could appear on lunch menus. Marshmallow fluff on one slice of white bread, peanut butter on the other pressed together, that was the recipe, and kids treated it like dessert disguised as lunch. Fluff had been manufactured in Lynn, Massachusetts, since 1920, and the pairing took off when Durkee printed the recipe on jars in the 60s. The combination was sugar and fat and protein, sticky enough to glue your mouth shut and sweet enough to erase whatever happened at recess. Outside New England, most people have never heard of it. Inside New England, saying you've never had one marks you as an outsider faster than mispronouncing Worcester. The Fluffernutter belongs to a specific place and a specific childhood. If yours wasn't one of them, you missed something the recipe alone can't recreate. The cheese and pickle sandwich is one of those odd combinations that divides people at the very first bite. On one side of the bread, you've got sharp cheddar or American cheese. On the other, sliced dill pickles or even sweet bread and butter chips. It's a collision of creamy and tangy, savory and sour. Some folks butter the bread, some toast it, others eat it plain and cold, but the core idea remains the same. It's a sandwich that feels retro in the best way, like something you'd find packed in wax paper alongside a thermos of milk. It's humble but bold, weird but strangely addictive. Born from the era of rationing and refrigerator scrounging, It was perfect for meatless lunches or quick snacks when the deli drawer was bare, and somehow it always worked, especially if the cheese was sharp enough to bite back. Today, it lives on in lunchboxes, late-night cravings, and memories of brown bag field trips. It might not be everyone's favorite, but for those who get it, there's nothing else quite like it. Add creamed corn, you know how rich and flavorful it can be. Now imagine spreading it onto bread for a sandwich. That's exactly what the creamed corn sandwich was. Canned creamed corn, drained just enough to prevent it from being too watery, was spooned onto toast or bread. It was messy, yes, but it was also delicious. The sweetness and creaminess of the corn paired perfectly with the bread, creating a satisfying and hearty meal. It wasn't the kind of sandwich you'd take to a picnic, but it was a beloved comfort food in many households during lean times. Whether it was a quick lunch or a dinner replacement, creamed corn made it easy to put together a meal that was both filling and affordable. The messiness just added to its charm, and it was a sandwich that brought a taste of sweetness to an otherwise tough time. If you think creamed corn on bread is indulgent, wait until you hear about the next sandwich that combines salty and sweet in an unexpected way. The salami and cheese sandwich was another deli favorite. This is another Italian classic. Salami and cheese sandwiches have roots in Italian cuisine, where cured meats like salami were often paired with cheeses in traditional sandwiches. Salami paired well with various cheeses, including provolone, Swiss, or cheddar. So grandma just used whatever was on hand. But for a true salami and cheese sandwich, crusty Italian ciabatta is a must, and it's even better when it's homemade with love. Now salami has been around since ancient Rome, but it became popular in sandwiches during the 20th century as Italian-American communities spread their culinary traditions. This sandwich wasn't really the healthiest choice out there, but Graham loved spoiling us every now and then, and there was no better treat than this bad boy. Smoked trout cornbread sandwiches were the northern traveler's treasure. Smoked flaked fish folded into thick slices of cornmeal bread packed tight for the road. It was not fancy, but it was powerful. Tribes along cold lakes and mountain rivers smoked their fish until it could last for weeks, then sandwiched it between pan-fried or stone-baked cornbread slabs. The result was portable, rich in protein, and layered with smoke and earth. A bite of this and you got the forest, the stream, and the campfire in one go. The sandwich was eaten on horseback, in canoes, or tucked in bark pouches during hunting treks. The trout, pink and oily, often mixed with herbs or wild onions. The cornbread was dense and hearty, able to hold its shape for days without crumbling. Today, these sandwiches are nearly extinct, replaced by crackers and canned spreads that barely hint at what used to be. The trout is still there, and so is the cornmeal, but the memory of pressing them together in survival and ceremony has faded. What was once instinctual is now sold separately at specialty food stores. Do we even know what we lost when the smoke stopped rising from those riverside camps? Salmon salad sandwiches were the quiet cousins of tuna salad, just as creamy, just as homemade, but with a taste that caught you off guard. Made from canned salmon, mashed with mayonnaise and a few dashes of seasoning, it was a sandwich that felt fancier than it had any right to be. It sometimes had diced onion, sometimes celery, sometimes nothing but salt and pepper and whatever was on hand. Spread thick on white or rye bread, it carried the scent of the sea and the comfort of Sunday leftovers. It was not flashy, it was not for everyone, but it was honest. Salmon salad was often packed by parents or grandparents who remembered when fish was a treat, not just something from a drive-thru. It was nutritious, filling, and just enough out of the ordinary to make you notice. Kids either traded it away or claimed it proudly, like a secret code for being raised right. It rarely shows up in lunchboxes today, but in vintage kitchens and handwritten recipes it still holds its place. Quiet, consistent, and always just a little unexpected. Barbecue chicken in the 1970s was a backyard dream, but when you packed it into a sandwich, that was where the magic happened. Picture this: pressure-cooked chicken, shredded until it practically melts in your fingers, then soaked in a sticky sweet barbecue sauce that was heavy on the brown sugar, light on the smoke, and all about that southern charm. No fancy rubs, no mesquite wood, just good sauce and thyme. Scoop that hot, saucy goodness onto a fresh Kaiser roll and watch it disappear. The bread soaked up every bit of that tangy, sweet heat, turning each bite into a juicy, handheld meal. Some folks added pickles, others dropped in coleslaw. But at its core, it was pure 1970s comfort food, straight from the slow cooker or stovetop pot. It was perfect for potlucks, church picnics, and family dinners where everyone wore wide collars and polyester. It stuck with you, literally and emotionally. Every bite was messy, sticky, and totally worth the napkin pile you built along the way. But while this sandwich brought the meat, the next one proved you did not need any at all to steal the show. Just a skillet, some zucchini, and a bit of melted cheddar. Mock chicken sandwich was another classic from the infamous era of the Great Depression. It was a pretty popular sandwich considering you could find it in 8 out of 10 households, though probably not for the reasons you're thinking. It is mock chicken after all, and since meat was a lot more expensive back then, households came up with a trick recipe to create mock chicken. The recipe started showing up in cookbooks in the 1920s, which helped boost its popularity amongst people. The recipe was simple: an onion, a tomato, egg, butter, and some herbs like oregano, parsley, and basil. You'd cook the tomatoes and onions together, then add butter, beating this combination together until you get a meatish consistency, one that was akin to chicken. This would be assembled in a sandwich to give people the taste of chicken without using any meat. Number 27. The potato sandwich. Cold fried potatoes from the night before, stacked between 2 slices of bread with salt and pepper. This was common across Appalachia and the rural South, where potatoes were cheap and bread was cheaper. Some families mashed the potatoes first and spread them like butter. Others sliced them thin and layered them. Either way, the sandwich was dense, filling, and plain. A dab of mustard lifted it, but most people ate it bare. The potato sandwich was not a recipe anyone wrote down. It was a solution. You had leftover potatoes, you had bread, and you had a long afternoon ahead. Put them together, wrap it in a cloth, and go. Number 23. Olive nut on white toast. Stirring cream cheese soft with the back of a fork was how the recipe started. Chopped green olives with the pimento still in them, and toasted black walnuts, all folded until the mixture turned pale yellow, flecked with red and brown. Spread on white toast and cut diagonally. The sandwich showed up in every Better Homes and Gardens cookbook for 15 years and then quietly disappeared. Cream cheese moved on to bagels. Olives moved on to martinis. The black walnuts went the hardest because nobody was harvesting them anymore. The olive nut was simple and beautiful in an odd way, like a tea party leftover that the working world had borrowed for an hour. Now you can go a year of eating in restaurants and never once see one on a plate. Leftover roast vegetable sandwiches were the kind of meal grandparents made when they refused to let anything go to waste. After dinner, they would gather whatever vegetables were left in the pan, fry them up in a little oil or leftover drippings, and stack them high between slices of bread. Carrots, potatoes, onions, squash, and anything else that happened to be sitting in the bowl all came together into something far better than you expected. The heat revived them, bringing back the flavors that had dulled after sitting out, and the bread turned it into a portable, handheld feast. It tasted warm, smoky, and rich, like something you would order from a corner cafe that prided itself on rustic charm. Grandparents knew how to stretch leftovers into entirely new meals, and this sandwich was one of their greatest hits. It was cheap, filling, and comforting, giving you a whole second dinner out of what everyone else would have thrown away. Eating it reminded you that grandparents never needed a recipe to impress you. They just needed a skillet, a little oil, and the sense to know that food could always be made new again. These sandwiches were thick, messy, and unforgettable, carrying with them the memory of kitchens where nothing was ever wasted and everything was always used with care. Number 11. The fried rabbit sandwich. Rabbit was the most common wild meat in the hills. You hunted them with a single-shot .22 or caught them in a box trap built from scrap lumber. The meat was lean and mild, somewhere between chicken and pork, but finer grained than either one. You soaked the pieces in salted water overnight, dredged them in seasoned flour, and fried them in lard until the crust turned deep brown. A fried rabbit leg or a piece of backstrap on white bread with salt and pepper was a Saturday supper in the Appalachian foothills from the 1920s through the 1960s. Boys learned to hunt rabbit before they learned to drive. The fried rabbit sandwich disappeared when the woods got smaller and the supermarkets got bigger, and a whole generation grew up never knowing what wild game tasted like between two slices of bread. There is a particular kind of knowledge that lives in the hands. Not in books, not in classrooms, but in the fingers that know how hot the grease should be before the bread goes in, how thin to slice the ham so it curls at the edges, how much pressure to put on a biscuit so it splits clean without crumbling. That knowledge was passed at kitchen tables and wood stoves and open fires for generations, and it was never written down because nobody thought it needed to be. It was just how things were done. When the last person who knew vanished, the sandwich vanished with them. Not because the ingredients disappeared, but because the hands that made it right were gone. That is what we actually lost here, not recipes. Hands. The fried peanut butter and banana sandwich got its fame from Memphis, but it lived in kitchens long before anyone called it the Elvis. The trick, the one his cook, Mary Jenkins, figured out, was toasting the bread first, loading it with creamy peanut butter and sliced banana, pressing the halves together, and frying the whole thing in butter until the outside turned golden and the inside went soft. His father, Vernon, showed Mary the method. She said Elvis ate them at every hour, butter running down his arm, never once measuring anything. In February of 1976, he flew from Graceland to Denver at 1 in the morning to eat the Fool's Gold Loaf, a hollowed-out French bread stuffed with a jar of peanut butter, a jar of preserves, and a pound of bacon, at a hangar on the tarmac. That sandwich cost $49.95. The simple version, though, the one you could make at midnight with whatever was in the pantry, that was the one worth remembering. Pickled beet sandwiches brought both color and tang to the plain bread that housewives had to stretch as far as possible. Beets were cheap, easy to preserve, and often pickled in jars to last through long months when fresh produce was not available. Thin slices of pickled beets layered between bread gave a bright vinegary bite that stood out among otherwise plain meals. They bled their purple-red color into the bread, making the sandwich as striking as it was thrifty. Many families enjoyed this because it provided vegetables in a form that could last, while also adding acidity that made the meal taste fresher. Sometimes a thin spread of butter was added to soften the sharpness, but often the beets stood alone. Children were not always fond of the sour flavor, but adults appreciated the practicality. It was simple, filling, and dependable, which were the key qualities of a working family's lunch. Pickled beet sandwiches may not appear today at lunch tables, yet in the 1950s they were a proud example of turning preserved vegetables into survival food. Nobody told you tuna and apple belonged together. You had to discover it by accident at a covered dish supper, eating before anyone explained what was in it. The combination appears in junior league cookbooks and church recipe collections from the era. Star-kissed, drained and flaked, folded into Hellmann's with celery, lemon juice, and half a Granny Smith chopped small. Skippy and Hellmann's ran joint advertising campaigns in the 1970s Los Angeles Herald promoting sweet and savory combinations, validating what home cooks had already figured out. It went on white bread, or sometimes whole wheat if the household had tipped toward the health food movement. The apple browned fast if you didn't move quickly. You made it and ate it that afternoon. She made it every Tuesday after the grocery run. Nobody makes it on Tuesdays anymore. They called it the emergency sandwich because that is exactly what it was. The meal you made when nothing was left and someone still needed to eat. A 1920 recipe from the calendar of sandwiches and beverages laid it out. Hard-boiled eggs chopped with whatever pickle you had, bound with mustard and peanut butter, thinned with vinegar if the paste was too thick. Every ingredient was shelf-stable and already in the cupboard. The sandwich belonged to the 30s the way bread lines did, born when families opened their pantries and saw almost nothing. You made it because the alternative was sending your kids out with empty hands. Egg and peanut butter and pickle sound strange now, but strange was a luxury nobody could afford. You ate what was there. The recipe survived in church pamphlets and Depression-era cookbooks passed along by women who understood that feeding a family on nothing was its own kind of skill. The hot brown was what you made when you had leftovers and a little bit of pride. Open-faced, built on a thick slice of toast, then loaded with turkey and bacon. But what made it special was the Mornay sauce, a rich, cheesy bechamel poured over the top and broiled until it bubbled and browned. It came out of Louisville, Kentucky from the Brown Hotel, but it made its way to family tables when there was turkey to use up and dads wanted something more than a cold sandwich. It was warm. It was indulgent. And it felt like dinner, even if it was built from scraps. Some versions added tomato slices, some skipped the broiler. But the essence stayed: meat, cheese, bread, and heat. Working men who came home hungry could make one in 10 minutes. It was not pretty. It did not stack well. But it hit the spot and filled the plate. Sometimes that was all you asked of a meal. When times were tough and budgets were tight, the potted meat and pickle sandwich became a popular choice for many families. Potted meat, often deviled ham or canned potted meat, was an affordable and long-lasting option that could be stored on the shelf for months. It was a quick fix for lunch or dinner, providing the protein needed to get through the day without breaking the bank. The key to this sandwich was the addition of pickles, which added a sharp, tangy crunch that perfectly complemented the rich, salty meat. The pickles cut through the richness of the potted meat, bringing balance and an extra layer of flavor to the sandwich. Combined with the soft bread, it created a hearty, satisfying meal. While the sandwich might not have been gourmet, it was practical, affordable, and filling. Potted meat, though not glamorous, was a staple in many households during difficult times because of its long shelf life and low cost. The pickles, often a pantry staple, brought a much-needed contrast to the meat, giving the sandwich a bit of freshness and bite. This sandwich was a great example of how people made do with what they had, using simple ingredients to create a meal that could feed a family without breaking the bank. And while the potted meat and pickle combo served its purpose well, things are about to get a little more savory and filling with the next sandwich. Remember what chilly days at Graham's called for back in the day? If you guessed hot turkey sandwich, you're absolutely right. This sandwich was another one of Grandma's delicious ways of using up leftover turkey from Thanksgiving. This sandwich featured slices of tender turkey served hot, often open-faced, with a generous ladle of rich, savory gravy poured over the top. Sounds delicious, right? Grandma made her hot turkey sandwich special with the gravy. Whether she made it from scratch with turkey drippings or used a trusted recipe, the rich gravy soaked into the bread, making each bite juicy and flavorful. She knew that nothing went to waste, and the hot turkey sandwich was a delicious way to make the most of those leftovers. Ash cakes stuffed with smoked rabbit were the kind of food you didn't find in markets. You had to earn them. Made by burying cornmeal dough directly into hot ashes beneath a fire, the outer layer blackened and crisped while the inside steamed to tender perfection. Once cooled, the cakes were split open and stuffed with shredded smoked rabbit, seasoned lightly with wild herbs or nothing at all. This was real survival fare, prepared deep in the woods or beside a smoldering hearth. The smoky flavors from both cake and meat melted together, making the whole thing taste like it had lived beside the fire for days. You could eat it hot, or wrap it in cloth and take it out again days later. There were no condiments, no napkins, no fancy names, just hunger and ingenuity. Some tribes even used clay to shield the dough from burning, peeling it off once baked. Today, ash cakes survive mostly as a footnote in cookbooks, and smoked rabbit is a rarity outside of specialty game markets. But once, these sandwiches were warm, smoky lifelines through long, lean winters. Walnut paste and apple bark sandwiches sound like a woodland riddle, but they were once a clever traveler's snack. Walnut meats were ground into a thick, oily paste, protein-rich, slightly bitter, and deeply satisfying. That paste was spread onto thin sheets of dried apple slices, sometimes softened slightly by heat, other times left crisp and bark-like. The result was a kind of nut butter and fruit sandwich that could be folded up, packed away, and eaten on the go without spoiling. The flavor was earthy and sweet, with a dry crunch that left your mouth thirsty but your belly full. Some versions even included hickory nuts or a drizzle of wild honey when available. though those were luxuries. It didn't need to be pretty. It just needed to work. Today, apple bark is nearly unheard of, and walnut paste has been overtaken by peanut butter and branding. But this was the original trail ration, prepared without a kitchen, without a label, just hands, heat, and memory. Peanut butter and honey sandwiches were the gentle cousin of the classic peanut butter and jelly, quieter, softer, and maybe a little sweeter. Instead of fruit preserves, this version replaced the tang with something more mellow, something that stuck to the roof of your mouth and made your fingers smell like golden syrup all afternoon. It was the sandwich you got when the jelly jar was empty, but love was still in stock. A simple swipe of peanut butter on one slice, a drizzle of honey on the other, and two halves pressed together until the honey oozed just enough to make you pause. These sandwiches were often packed quickly, folded into wax paper, and slightly crushed by the weight of textbooks. But that did not matter. If anything, it made them better. There was something old-fashioned about it, something kind. Peanut butter and honey tasted like slow mornings, kind grandparents, and meals that did not need to be fancy to be filling. Today, they are harder to find in school cafeterias and less likely to show up in lunchboxes full of brand-name snacks. The ham salad was the sandwich that crept into your life without warning and just stayed. It was never flashy, never demanding, but it had a way of showing up when you needed it most. Diced ham, usually the leftovers from Sunday dinner, got chopped fine and tossed with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, and maybe a squirt of yellow mustard or a spoonful of Miracle Whip if you were feeling wild. It was smooth, creamy, with just enough tang to make you wonder why you did not eat it more often. Spread it thick on soft white bread, throw on a lettuce leaf if you're trying to be classy, and you had a sandwich that felt like summer picnics and small-town potlucks. It tasted like home. Like old Tupperware containers pulled from the fridge and packed into a picnic basket with a bag of chips and a slice of pie wrapped in foil. No one ever called it their favorite, but no one turned it down either. That is the magic of ham salad. It stayed in the background, steady and familiar. But not every sandwich played it safe. Some brought the heat, and maybe a little spice from south of the border. The cheese and Marmite sandwich is a rather confusing mix of ingredients with cheese slices and Marmite spread coming together to create a gooey sandwich. It's got an extremely memorable kick to it with its yeasty, savory, and salty notes. Now, this was really popular in the 50s, 80s, especially among the middle class and the 30-40-year-old age group. Conventional way to make it is definitely the easiest. Toast, Marmite spread, and melted cheese. Remember, fundamentally, this is not that different from your average grilled cheese sandwich. In fact, it's pretty much the same, just switching the ingredients around a little. Do be warned though, Marmite is a dense, pungent tasting thing. It has a strong flavor, so try just a tablespoon or two before you go all in and start spreading crazily. Number 22. The chip sandwich. A handful of potato chips pressed between bread with a smear of butter to hold them in place. The crunch was the whole point. Children made these after school without being told. Salt, fat, and starch hit every craving at once. Mothers looked the other way. In parts of the Midwest and the South through the 1950s and 1960s, this was so common nobody thought to name it. But by the time snack aisles doubled in size and after-school routines shifted to microwaved meals, the chip sandwich quietly disappeared. Today, most people under 40 have never heard of one. It was not a recipe. It was a moment, and that moment belonged to a kitchen that no longer exists. Number 24. Leverwurst on rye with raw onion. The smell hit you before you saw the plate, like wet leather and pepper, and the bite of raw onion came right behind. Boar's Head sliced the loaf thick at every Liggett's drugstore in Brooklyn through the 50s. The counterman layered it on seeded rye with a sharp ring of yellow onion, a smear of brown mustard, and a single dill spear set off to the side. The sandwich was loud. The onion bit, the mustard cut through. The liverwurst itself was soft, a dusky pink paste of pork liver and fat that the immigrant butchers in Yorkville had been making for 30 years before it ever reached the rail. You could eat one standing up in 4 minutes and walk back to the shop full of it. But the kids would not eat organ meats anymore by 1975. The doctors were warning about cholesterol. By 2024, Boar's Head stopped making liverwurst entirely. There was a generation of countercooks who could trim a liverwurst loaf in their sleep, and there is no one left now to teach the next one how. And mayonnaise sandwiches were the kind of simple perfection that could only come from grandparents who understood the power of fresh ingredients and soft white bread. A late summer tomato sliced thick and dripping with juice could transform the most ordinary day into something memorable. Grandparents knew how to pick them, pressing gently to feel for that perfect softness that meant the tomato had lived its best life. Then came the mayonnaise, spread edge to edge with a focus that would make a professional chef blush. The first bite was always messy in the best way, juices mixing with mayonnaise until it tasted like something from a restaurant that bragged about farm fresh produce. It was cheap, but never felt cheap. These sandwiches were like a quiet family secret, something learned only by standing in a warm kitchen while a grandparent sliced tomatoes with the same knife they had used for years. Eating it felt like eating a season, tied to gardens, porch swings, and long afternoons. Joy made from bread, tomato, and mayonnaise. Grandparents never explained it. They just handed it to you, knowing it was unforgettable. Number 18. The sardine and cracker sandwich. A tin of sardines cost a dime at the general store, and it kept on the shelf for years without refrigeration. You peeled back the tin lid, laid the sardines on saltine crackers, added a drop of hot sauce if you had a bottle around, and that was lunch. Coal miners in West Virginia and Kentucky carried sardine tins in their lunch pails because the fish did not spoil in the heat of the mine. Farmers kept a few tins in the barn for the same reason. The oil in the tin was salty and rich, and some people poured it right over the crackers. It was protein that traveled well and asked nothing of you in return. No cooking, no preparation, no cleanup. Just peel, eat, and throw the tin in the trash. The men who ate sardine sandwiches did not apologize for them. They peeled back the tin lid with the key, laid the small silver fish across dark rye bread, squeezed lemon from a wedge in the refrigerator door, added a line of hot mustard, and ate at the kitchen table with a glass of beer and the evening paper. The sardines came packed in olive oil or mustard sauce, imported from Portugal or Norway, and the brands mattered. King Oscar for the purists, Beach Cliff for the budget-minded, Brunswick for the ones who bought whatever was on sale. During the Depression, sardines were protein you could afford when meat was a luxury, and that reputation clung to the fish long after the hard times ended. By the 70s, a sardine sandwich was a working man's lunch, eaten without ceremony. The smell lingered in the kitchen for hours afterward, and everyone knew what he'd had. He didn't care. The fish cost 30 cents a tin and kept him full until dinner. Bacon skin sandwiches were born from the insistence that no part of the animal should ever go to waste. The leftover rind, often trimmed from bacon before cooking, was fried until crisp and then layered between slices of bread. The result was salty, chewy, and deeply flavorful, providing a taste of bacon without the expense of full slices. Families who could not afford to throw anything away cherished these sandwiches as a way to stretch protein into more meals. Housewives valued them because they turned scraps into something practical and even desirable. Children often enjoyed the crunch, while adults appreciated the smoky richness that still lingered in the rind. Bacon skin sandwiches carried pride because they showed how far thrift could go in making sure nothing edible was discarded. In the 1950s, it was about survival as much as flavor, and even the smallest bits of meat were transformed into a meal. This sandwich is rarely remembered today, but for many families, it was a lifeline. Hot open-faced roast beef, white bread flat on a plate, overlapping slices of Sunday's leftover roast beef, then the gravy brown and glossy from drippings, flour, and beef stock, poured so generously the bread disappeared beneath it, was the kind of meal that required a fork and a knife but cost less than $1.50 and still felt like effort. In the upper Midwest, they called it a commercial. Beef commercial, turkey commercial. Diner shorthand on menus from Minnesota to Wisconsin through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. You ordered it because it was cold and the mashed potatoes cost 30 cents extra, and you always got them. The home version was made on Mondays from Sunday's roast. The drippings scraped from the refrigerator where they'd solidified overnight into a rust-colored disc that smelled of everything good the oven had done to the meat. When the Sunday roast stopped, this disappeared with it. Long before anyone dressed a sandwich with deli meat, families in coal country pulled lard from a tin bucket and smeared it across whatever bread they had. The lard sandwich was rendered pig fat, white and thick, on day-old bread with a pinch of salt. That was lunch. In Depression-era Iowa, Richard Willis remembered eating them as a boy, and across Appalachia and the coal towns of West Virginia, kids carried lard sandwiches in their pails because there was nothing else. Sometimes the bread was open-face and topped with cold beans, sometimes folded shut and wrapped in newspaper. The fat kept you full through a shift in the mine or a morning in the schoolhouse. It tasted like survival, and nobody pretended otherwise. The families who ate them didn't talk about it afterward. That silence said everything about what those years cost. The Kmart submarine sandwich was not just food. It was part of the shopping trip. You would head into Kmart for socks, a screwdriver, maybe a birthday card, and at the back of the store, the cafeteria called to you. That big white roll, sliced open and loaded with ham, salami, bologna, and slices of American cheese. Lettuce, banana peppers, maybe a swipe of mustard or a dollop of mayonnaise, wrapped in wax paper and handed over the counter by a teenager in a paper hat. It was not gourmet. It was not healthy, but it was satisfying. It had heft. You sat at a red table with molded plastic chairs and bit in. It was salty and soft and just a little greasy. The flavors bled into the bread by the last bite. You drank a fountain soda and wiped your hands with a brown paper napkin. It felt like a reward for getting the errands done. It felt like a pause in a world that never stopped moving. The Kmart sub was not trying to be memorable, but it became a memory anyway. Food was scarce, nothing went to waste, and the leftover bean sandwich is the perfect example of how resourceful families could be. Whether you had baked beans, pintos, or navy beans left from a previous meal, they made the perfect filling for a sandwich. The beans were mashed up and spread between slices of bread, turning them into a hearty meal that was both filling and cost-effective. While onions could be added for a little extra flavor, this sandwich was great in its simplest form. It didn't require any fancy ingredients, just what you had left in the fridge. The beans added protein and substance, making it a satisfying meal that could get you through a long day. This sandwich wasn't about perfection. It was about making the most of what you had and turning leftovers into something practical. It was the kind of meal that didn't need much to make it taste good. So, while leftover beans might not have been the highlight of the dinner table, they certainly played an important role when it came time to put together a quick lunch or snack. But if you think beans on bread are a clever solution, the next sandwich might just have you rethinking your idea of what makes a satisfying meal. When it comes to sandwiches, only a few were as satisfying as the roast beef sandwich. So, many sandwiches were originally created as a clever way to repurpose leftovers, and this one was no exception. Roast beef sandwiches often started with leftovers from Sunday dinner. The Sunday roast was a time-honored tradition, and any extra beef was used to make delicious sandwiches for lunch the next day. In 1900, the dish was described by the Washington Post as unattractive and as a tired ark in a gravy flood. However, it gained popularity in the coming years when Grandma decided to take matters into her own hands, and by 1931, some critics even went as far as to describe it as a true taste of South Dakota. The bread for Grandma's roast beef sandwich was often homemade, and boy did she know how to dress it up. Whether it was a dollop of horseradish sauce, a spread of mustard, or a smear of mayonnaise, Gram knew exactly what it needed, and if we got lucky, she even snuck in a slice of cheese. Salmon belly sandwiches with wild greens were pure coastal power, fatty, rich fish layered with gathered greens and tucked into dough made from maize or even wrapped in kelp. The belly was the prized cut, oiled and luscious, smoked or seared just enough to flake apart. The greens were bitter or sharp, dandelion, nettle, or mustard leaves picked fresh from coastal soil. The bread varied, sometimes dense and baked, other times simply a blanket of dried seaweed. Either way, the effect was the same. nourishment from land and sea, eaten slowly or taken for a cold journey ahead. Salmon belly is now tossed aside in favor of cleaner cuts. Wild greens are weeded out or sprayed over. And the knowledge of how they fit together? Nearly gone. These sandwiches were medicine in a way. They kept bones strong and hearts full. Now we barely know what to do with them. What happens when we forget how to eat the best parts? Throughout the hardships of the Great Depression, creativity in the kitchen became as vital as bread itself, leading to culinary experiments that modern taste buds might find curious. Among these unusual creations was the humble yet surprisingly refreshing cucumber and sugar sandwich. Thinly sliced cucumbers lightly dusted with sugar, sandwiched between slices of bread. Sugar may seem extravagant for the 1930s, yet households often had small reserves carefully rationed for moments exactly like this, transforming bland cucumbers into something akin to dessert. Garden cucumbers, prolific and hardy, grew abundantly, becoming the unsung heroes of many Depression-era meals. Interestingly, cucumbers were favored because they matured rapidly, providing a dependable source of nutrition when pantry staples were uncertain. Clever homemakers discovered sprinkling sugar over cucumbers masked their watery blandness, turning a simple vegetable sandwich into an affordable treat. Even kids who usually avoided vegetables happily ate it. In fact, this unlikely pairing became popular enough to feature in homemaking pamphlets of the era, billed as a sweet sandwich children would actually finish. In Depression-era kitchens, nothing green escaped the resourceful eye of American homemakers, not even celery leaves, the unsung heroes at the top of the stalk. These leafy leftovers starred in the celery leaf sandwich, a sandwich created by chopping tender celery greens, lightly salting them, and buttering them generously between slices of bread. Today, most cooks casually discard celery leaves without a second thought. But during the 1930s, throwing away anything edible felt as reckless as burning dollar bills. Celery itself was inexpensive and readily available, often grown at home or bought cheaply at markets. However, the leaves offered a frugal bonus, rich in nutrients and flavor. Savvy cooks of the Depression recognized celery leaves had a slightly peppery taste, perfect for transforming plain bread into something fresh-tasting and surprisingly elegant. Historical home economics columns humorously urged housewives never to waste celery leaves, suggesting that to do so would mean missing out on a luxury sandwich costing mere pennies. Indeed, celery leaf sandwiches earned a reputation as budget-friendly sophistication, making appearances at ladies' luncheons where no one dared reveal the secret ingredient came straight from vegetable trimmings. The scrapple sandwich is exactly what the name suggests: fried slices of scrapple on bread. Traditionally, this sandwich would be sliced and prepared in a skillet, under a thick layer of eggs. It definitely became popular around the Maryland to New York district, but the recipe itself is properly ancient. An 1853 extract from a cookbook advises using pork that wouldn't be suitable for sausage. It was also popular for its health benefits. It can be made in a variety of ways, and some people include crispy cabbage on top and make it into a waffle with mayo. Mix and match and see what works best for you. Maybe you'll find something worth sharing. But for now, the scrapple sandwich can only be something you create. With its popularity last seen in the mid-1850s, this sandwich is something that we can only find in old extracts now. Number 23. The Cheese Dream. An open-faced sandwich made with a slice of American cheese on white bread, sometimes with a tomato slice or a strip of bacon, run under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and browned at the edges. This was the original grilled cheese before anyone called it that. Home economists in the 1930s and 1940s promoted it as an affordable, protein-rich supper. The name came from the way the melted cheese puffed under the heat, like something rising in a dream. You ate it with a fork because the cheese was too hot to hold. One slice of cheese, one slice of bread, one person fed. Number 18. Watercress with butter. Trimming the crust with a wet knife was how the small ceremony started. The bread was crustless white, paper thin, spread with sweet butter from end to end. Watercress went on rinsed and picked over, laid in a dense green carpet that almost glowed against the white. A second slice pressed on top, the sandwich cut into 4 neat triangles on a paper doily, a department store clerk on her lunch break, a teacher on a 40-minute window, a Saturday shopper into the city. All of them could order one and feel the day had been a small occasion. The watercress trade was supplied by a handful of farms, and as those farms shrank, the sandwich shrank with them. The tea sandwich tradition is mostly gone now, and watercress with butter went with it. Butter and sugar sandwiches were the quiet little treat that felt like a celebration even when there was nothing special going on. Grandparents would take soft white bread, spread a generous layer of butter across it, and sprinkle just enough sugar to make it sparkle. Toast it lightly, and suddenly you had something that tasted like pastry from a bakery window. The butter melted into every corner of the bread, and the sugar turned into this delicate crunch that made the whole thing feel indulgent, despite being made from the simplest ingredients in the kitchen. It was sweet, without trying too hard, comforting without being heavy, and somehow tasted like more than the sum of its parts. When grandparents handed it to you warm, you felt like you were being given a secret treasure, one of those homemade miracles that adults forget about but kids remember forever. It was cheap, but it never tasted cheap. The flavor made you feel like you were eating dessert, even though it was technically just bread, butter, and sugar. Maybe that is why it stuck with so many people. It was the taste of being young, of having someone take the time to make you something small but meaningful. Butter and sugar sandwiches were proof that the simplest foods could make the biggest memories, and that a tiny bit of sweetness could carry you a long way. Number 17. The poke salad and egg sandwich. Pokeweed grows wild across the American South, and in the hills it was one of the first green things to come up in spring. But you had to know what you were doing. The raw plant is poisonous. You picked the young leaves before they got too big, boiled them in 3 changes of water to pull the toxins out, drained them, and fried them in bacon grease with scrambled eggs. The cooked greens tasted something like spinach, but earthier, and layered on bread with the eggs they made a sandwich that tasted like the woods themselves. Old-timers in the Ozarks and along the Appalachian ridges knew exactly when to pick poke and exactly how long to boil it. That knowledge passed from mother to daughter for generations. Today, most people walk right past pokeweed without recognizing it, and the sandwich walked away with them. Thomas's sold date nut bread in a can, a small, heavy cylinder that you opened from both ends and pushed the loaf out whole, dark as gingerbread and dense with chopped dates and walnuts. You sliced it thin, spread each round with cold cream cheese, and ate it in the afternoon with tea or coffee while the house was quiet. It was a tea room sandwich before it was a home sandwich, the kind of thing women's clubs served at luncheons in the 1950s alongside finger sandwiches and fruit salad in stemmed glasses. By the 70s, the canned loaf had moved from tea rooms to kitchen counters, and the women who bought it didn't need a club meeting to justify the indulgence. They ate it standing at the counter the way men ate liverwurst, quickly, alone, with no one watching. Thomas's still makes it, but the women who sliced it thin enough to see light through the bread are mostly gone now, and their daughters buy sourdough instead. Cottage cheese and pineapple sandwiches were a sweet and savory combination that showed how 1950s housewives turned pantry items into meals that felt refreshing yet cheap. Canned pineapple was common and affordable, while cottage cheese was viewed as a protein-packed food that could stretch further than meat. When paired together between soft slices of white bread, the sandwich gave a tangy, juicy bite that tasted different from the usual heavy fillers of the time. The pineapple's syrupy sweetness balanced the creamy saltiness of the cottage cheese, making it both light and filling. It was often served at luncheons, church gatherings, or simply as a midday bite for children at home. Housewives valued it not just for its thrift, but for the way it looked on the plate, with pineapple giving it a splash of brightness. It reflected a time when even simple foods carried pride, and combining canned fruit with dairy was considered inventive. Today it may sound strange, but in the 1950s it was seen as clever and satisfying, and for many families it provided comfort without stretching the grocery bill too far. The Reuben made at home told you something about the household's ambitions. You weren't making one unless you were committed. Corned beef from the deli counter, not pre-sliced lunch meat. Swiss, not American. Sauerkraut drained and pressed dry. Thousand Island or Russian dressing depending on which side of the argument you fell on. Dark marble rye buttered on the outside. Everything into a cast iron skillet, weighted, flipped once, pulled when the cheese went glossy and the bread reached walnut shell brown. The origin debate, Arnold Rubin's restaurant in New York, 1914, or Rubin Kulikovsky at the Blackstone Hotel in Omaha in the 1920s, was irrelevant to the families making it on Friday nights. What mattered was the press of the sandwich, the way everything melted together under weight and heat into something that tasted like it had always existed. Without the weight and the heat, you had ingredients. That distinction was the whole recipe. But before any of those diner sandwiches reached the suburban kitchen, something older had been feeding the Midwest for 50 years already. Nobody under 50 has heard of the egg and olive sandwich, but mention it to a woman who attended a church potluck before 1970 and watch her face change. Chopped green olives folded into creamy egg salad, the brine cutting through the richness of yolk, made this a fixture at ladies' luncheons and covered dish suppers through the 40s and 50s. Hard-boiled eggs mashed with a fork, a handful of manzanilla olives, mayonnaise, a dash of paprika. It went on crustless white bread, cut into triangles, arranged with the kind of precision that said presentation was its own pride. Jars of stuffed olives cost pennies, and every kitchen had one. The sandwich disappeared when formal gatherings stopped and convenience foods took over. Nobody killed it. The world just moved too fast for crustless triangles. The muffaletta was not born in the average working man's kitchen, but it made its way there. Originating in New Orleans, it was a dense, round loaf stuffed with layers of salami, ham, mortadella, mozzarella, and provolone. The real magic came from the olive salad, chopped green and black olives, pickled vegetables, garlic, and oil, soaked into the bread like marinade. It was pressed, it was loud, it was messy, but it traveled well. That made it perfect for job sites, road crews, and long-haul truckers. You wrapped a wedge in foil, and it was still good hours later. The flavors deepened. The oil soaked in. You needed 2 hands to hold it, and at least 10 napkins. It was not dainty, but it was built to last. For men who worked through lunch or ate from the front seat, it was a solid, no-nonsense meal. A sandwich with weight. A sandwich with roots. It was not just New Orleans flair. It was lunch with attitude. When it comes to using leftovers in the most creative way, the spaghetti sandwich is a prime example of resourcefulness. After a hearty meal of spaghetti, rather than letting any leftover noodles go to waste, many families would stuff the cold or reheated pasta between slices of bread, creating a sandwich that was both filling and practical. The beauty of the spaghetti sandwich lay in its simplicity. There was no need for additional ingredients, just pasta and sauce on bread, and that was enough to provide sustenance. Whether it was enjoyed cold or warmed up in a skillet, this sandwich made use of what was already prepared, turning leftovers into a whole new meal. It was a quick fix for lunch or dinner when funds were tight, and cooking from scratch wasn't an option. For many, the spaghetti sandwich wasn't just a meal, it was a way to stretch food further, especially during times of scarcity. The bread helped soak up the sauce, while the pasta provided a comforting, hearty filling. It wasn't a sandwich you'd see at a fancy restaurant, but it served its purpose well, turning a simple leftover dish into a satisfying, portable meal. It's the kind of meal that may sound odd to some, but to those who lived through hard times, it was a tasty and practical solution. When you needed to fill up and didn't have time or money for anything else, the spaghetti sandwich got the job done. And if you think spaghetti on bread is a simple fix, wait until you see what's next. The meatball sub is the kind of sandwich that's meant to be messy. The meatball sub has its origins in Italian-American cuisine. While meatballs are a traditional Italian dish, the meatball sub became popular in the U.S. as Italian immigrants put an American twist to it. We're talking juicy meatballs, marinara sauce topped with melted cheese on a long, crusty roll. Yeah, it doesn't really get more American than this. What makes or breaks this sandwich is the sauce, and Grandma knew it all too well. The sauce had to be the right balance of sweetness and acidity, and of course, the bread had to be sturdy enough to hold everything together. It's the kind of sandwich that you need 2 hands to eat, and maybe a napkin or two, but it's worth every bite. It's a classic comfort food that never goes out of style. Acorn bread and wild berry meat sandwiches were forest sandwiches in the truest sense, built from the woods and eaten in silence under trees. The bread came first, made from acorn flour that had to be soaked, pounded, and leached of bitterness. It was a chore, a ritual, and a necessity. Then came the filling, thin slices of dried venison or rabbit, layered with crushed blackberries, choke cherries, or huckleberries, depending on the season. The sweetness cut the gaminess. The bread crumbled just slightly as you bit in. This was a sandwich that kept for days, that filled you up without making you heavy. It tasted like bark, rain, and sweetness after struggle. It traveled well. It honored the land. Native children once carried these into the woods like modern kids carry packed lunches. Now, acorn flour is a novelty ingredient. Dried game is bought in sealed plastic, and the pairing of both with wild berries no supermarket can replicate has been mostly lost. If someone handed you one today, would your mouth even recognize it as food or just memory? We stopped making these not because they were bad, but because we stopped doing the work they required. And maybe that is what hurts most. In the bleak economic landscape of the 1930s, the trusty carrot, often abundant and dirt cheap, was quietly elevated from supporting actor in stews to star ingredient in sandwich spreads like the carrot marmalade sandwich. Homemade carrot marmalade spread generously over stale bread might sound peculiar today, but during the Great Depression, it showcased a brilliant combination of thriftiness and culinary creativity. When sugar became scarce and costly, innovative homemakers cleverly utilized carrots' natural sweetness, simmering them slowly into a thick, jammy preserve to mimic traditional fruit marmalade. Notably, carrots were among the most reliably available vegetables during the Depression. Their hardiness meant nearly anyone could cultivate a patch, even with limited gardening skills. Families often had surplus carrots, providing an ideal solution to the era's pervasive hunger. To avoid waste, stale bread, previously destined for the compost heap, was refreshed by this sweet and slightly tangy marmalade, transforming it into an unexpectedly pleasant treat. Despite its humble origins, carrot marmalade gained popularity, prompting home economists of the time to distribute official recipes for this vitamin-packed, budget-friendly spread. Way before anyone was throwing around the word fusion, people were already stuffing taco night into a sandwich roll and calling it lunch. The taco-inspired ground beef sandwich was a bold, brilliant mess of spicy ground beef seasoned with chili powder, cumin, and whatever was on hand. This was the 70s after all. If it came in a seasoning packet, it was probably fair game. The meat got piled high into a soft hoagie roll, topped with shredded cheddar, crisp lettuce, and sometimes a few sad tomatoes trying to keep up. Every bite was an explosion of salty heat and melty cheese. It was not clean, it was not elegant, but it was delicious. This was comfort food that was borrowed from the taco truck before taco trucks were even a thing. You could find it at school cafeterias, mom-and-pop diners, and even in the occasional backyard cookout where somebody decided to get creative. The bread soaked up all that seasoned grease, and somehow it just worked. You were not going to win any awards for presentation, but your taste buds would be too busy partying to care. And speaking of comfort food with attitude, the next sandwich on our list came straight from the king himself, and probably your aunt's frying pan. A rather repulsive combo for some and appealing taste for others. The anchovy paste sandwich is a savory spread made from anchovy paste. This is less of a sandwich and more of a versatile condiment, but it does work extremely well on sandwiches, especially because the bread balances out the anchovy's taste. Historically, anchovy paste has always been used to give flavor and some pros to your health, but in the USA, it picked steam as a spread for sandwiches. You can spice this up with fried eggplants, tomatoes, chopped chicken chunks, a salad dressing, or anything you can imagine. This is one of those sandwiches where every time you try it, you can experiment. Number 19. The olive loaf sandwich, a processed lunch meat studded with pimento-stuffed green olives, sliced thin and laid on white bread with mayonnaise. Oscar Mayer and other brands sold it at every grocery store deli counter from the 1950s through the 1980s. The olives gave it a salty, briny bite that children either loved or refused outright. There was no middle ground. Mothers packed it in lunchboxes because one package made sandwiches for a full week. Olive loaf sat in the deli case next to bologna, and for a generation of children, it was as ordinary as the bread it came on. Today, it is nearly impossible to find. Number 15. Sloppy Joe Manhattan Style. The Sloppy Joe you remember from a school cafeteria tray was not the original. The original was a triple-decker deli sandwich invented at the Town Hall Deli in South Orange, New Jersey, in the early 1930s and adopted by Manhattan lunch counters by 1948. 3 slices of seeded rye, 2 layers of thinly sliced corned beef and Swiss, a layer of coleslaw, and a coat of Russian dressing between the layers. The whole sandwich was cut into quarters and pinned with toothpicks like a small flag held the thing together. You could eat one in 5 minutes and walk back to the office full. The deli claimed the recipe came home from a politician's vacation in Havana, where the bartender at a place called Sloppy Joe's served something similar with rum on the side. The story is more legend than history at this point, but the deli still tells it on the wall. The loose meat ground beef version came later out of Sioux City, Iowa, and took over the name by the late 40s. Articles about the cafeteria tray version were everywhere by 1957. One thing I noticed reading old menus is that the Manhattan version was always called Sloppy Joe with a capital, never Sloppy Joe lowercase, as if the name was a proper restaurant title. Most Americans today have no idea there were 2 completely different sandwiches called the same thing. The Manhattan one was better. Fried bologna sandwiches were the kind of magic only grandparents could pull off. The sort of everyday wizardry that took a slice of cheap meat and turned it into something that tasted like it belonged on a downtown diner plate. You would hear that skillet pop and hiss before you ever smelled it, and somehow that alone felt like a promise. Thick-cut bologna would curl as it hit the heat, browning until it took on that deep, savory flavor that made you forget it came from the bargain bin at the grocery store. Grandparents had this uncanny way of making simple food feel big and comforting, as if they knew exactly how to turn thrift into warmth. They would press it down with a spatula like they were working a grill at a lunch counter, then drop it onto warm bread slicked with mustard or mayonnaise. Sometimes they added a slice of cheese that melted just enough to glue everything together, and that tiny detail made the sandwich feel like a special order. Maybe it was the sizzling sound. Maybe it was the smoky smell. Or maybe it was the way grandparents cooked everything as if it were meant to matter. That sandwich was cheap and unassuming, yet the moment you bit into it, you knew it had found a permanent spot in your personal Hall of Fame. Number 23. The fried green tomato sandwich. You sliced a green tomato thick, at least a 1/4 inch, dredged it in cornmeal with salt and pepper, and fried it in a cast iron skillet until the coating crackled. Then you laid it on white bread, sometimes with a smear of mayonnaise, sometimes plain. The tomato stayed tart and firm inside that cornmeal shell, nothing like a ripe tomato. This was a late summer sandwich in the Appalachian foothills, when the garden was producing faster than anyone could eat and the first frost was still weeks away. You used the green ones because the ripe ones were going into canning jars. Nothing went to waste. The fried green tomato sandwich was what happened when practicality and flavor landed on the same plate. She kept the Braunschweiger in the back of the refrigerator, wrapped in its original casing, and sliced it herself with a thin knife she used for nothing else. Braunschweiger was liverwurst that had been smoked, giving it a deeper, almost bacon-like richness that spread across dark pumpernickel like it was born there. Jones Dairy Farm sold it in stubby rolls at every Midwestern grocery store, and the label hadn't changed since the 50s. Her version went on pumpernickel with a thick slice of raw onion and a smear of brown mustard so sharp it made your eyes water. You didn't ask why she preferred it to regular liverwurst. You watched her build it layer by layer, with the same hands that patched your jeans and braided your hair. Years later, you tried to make one yourself from a roll you found at a German butcher shop 2 towns over. The mustard was right. The onion was right. But the pumpernickel was wrong. and you couldn't figure out what she'd done differently until you realized it wasn't the bread. It was the kitchen. Canned peach and whipped oleo sandwiches reflected the blend of convenience and necessity that defined many 1950s kitchens. Margarine, often called oleo, was cheaper than butter and spread easily, while canned peaches provided sweetness and a taste of fruit when fresh options were unavailable. Housewives mashed peaches into the margarine, whipping the mixture into a spreadable paste that was both bright and filling. Pressed between slices of white bread, it became a sandwich that looked cheerful and tasted indulgent, even though it was entirely practical. The syrup from the peaches seeped into the bread, making it soft and sweet, while the oleo gave it richness. This sandwich carried the feeling of a treat, even though it was born from rationing and limited budgets. Families appreciated how far one can of peaches could stretch when turned into spread, especially when children craved something sweet. Canned peach and whipped oleo sandwiches may sound strange today, but they once represented both thrift and comfort in equal measure. The patty melt disappeared so quietly from home kitchens that nobody noticed it was gone until they looked at a diner menu and felt something like grief. It wasn't a hamburger and it wasn't a grilled cheese. It was the thing in between, which is exactly why it worked. Ground beef pressed into an oval patty on cast iron, then slid onto dark rye with Swiss and caramelized onions that had been going in butter for 20 minutes before the meat touched the pan. The whole thing went back on the griddle, pressed under something heavy, pulled when the bread was dark gold and the cheese surrendered. Patty melts appeared at Tiny Nailor's Drive-In in Los Angeles around 1950 and spread through diner culture over 2 decades, arriving in suburban kitchens by the early 1970s. The rye was the key. That slight sourness cutting through the fat of the beef and the sweetness of the onions. The ones that remember how to make it right are getting harder to find. James Beard, the man who wrote the book on American cooking, literally, loved almost nothing more than a sweet onion sandwich. Thick slices of Bermuda or Vidalia onion, layered on buttered white bread with mayonnaise, salt, and black pepper. That was it. No meat, no cheese, no distraction. He wrote about it with the kind of passion most chefs reserve for truffles, insisting the onion had to be sweet enough to eat raw and the bread soft enough to compress under a gentle press. The sandwich had a small, devoted audience through the 50s and 60s, mostly among people who took Beard seriously and understood that simplicity was its own mastery. It never went mainstream, the raw onion, and the breath it left behind ensured that. But for the people who made it, nothing else came close. Beard died in 1985, and the sandwich barely outlived him. The kind of cook who trusted a single raw ingredient to carry an entire meal is rarer now than a Vidalia onion in January. Roll-up sandwiches were the lunchbox experiment that actually worked. You took a slice of white sandwich bread and flattened it with a rolling pin or glass until it looked more like a napkin than bread. Then came the filling: peanut butter and banana, cream cheese with chopped bacon, even tuna salad if someone was feeling brave. You spread it edge to edge, rolled it tight like a sleeping bag, then sliced it into pinwheels. It was a working-class solution to picky kids and tight mornings. You did not need fancy deli meats or artisan bread. You needed 1 hand and 5 minutes. Sometimes you sprinkled paprika on top for color. Sometimes you stabbed each one with a toothpick and called it party food. But really it was a clever way to stretch ingredients. They showed up at baby showers, church potlucks, and tired weeknight dinners. They were fast, they were cheap, and they made something boring feel like a treat. In homes where the toaster was always broken and the oven rarely used, the roll-up was reliable. Quiet, silly, and sometimes oddly perfect. Sometimes simplicity is key, and the relish and cheese sandwich is the epitome of that principle. A slice of American cheese paired with a dollop of sweet pickle relish was all it took to create this unexpected but surprisingly delicious sandwich. The relish added a little sweetness and tang, while the cheese gave it a creamy, melty texture. It wasn't about fancy ingredients, just bread, cheese, and relish. The sweet and salty combination made it a great quick snack when funds were tight and you needed something to fill you up without breaking the bank. The relish provided a burst of flavor, cutting through the richness of the cheese, and the sandwich itself was easy to put together with ingredients that were often on hand. Even though it may seem like an odd combination, the simplicity of the relish and cheese sandwich made it a popular choice for those who needed something quick and satisfying. Whether you had it as a snack or a meal, it always offered a good balance of flavors. This sandwich wasn't going to win any gourmet awards, but it did the job when you needed a cheap and satisfying meal. Sometimes, it's the simplest combinations that leave the greatest impression. But if you think a slice of cheese and a bit of relish is all you need for a great sandwich, the next one might just take your taste buds by surprise. When it came to if there's one sandwich you can never go wrong with, it's the old-fashioned grilled cheese sandwich. This one is the epitome of comfort food, and Grandma's version was a childhood favorite. Even the pickiest eaters used to beg for this one. So this one became popular during the Great Depression era, when we had to make do with three of the most common ingredients in our pantries: bread, cheese, and butter. Now, some of us used to get creative with our grilled cheese by adding extras like sliced tomatoes, ham, bacon, or even pickles. But this one was best enjoyed simple and plain. Oh, and let's not forget, it tastes even better when paired with a warm bowl of tomato soup. Before burgers and fries, grilled cheese and tomato soup used to be the ultimate food combo of our dreams. The best part? Most cheese sandwiches are vegetarian and can easily be made vegan by adjusting the type of cheese and oil. Buffalo heart sandwiches on stone bread were once reserved for warriors and hunters. Thin slices of buffalo heart grilled directly over open flame, then served on thick, chewy rounds of unleavened bread cooked on hot stones. This wasn't just food, it was fuel. Dense with iron and flavor, the heart meat had a gamey bite softened only slightly by the bread's smoky crust. It was eaten with bare hands, no utensils, no ceremony, just fire and hunger. Some added wild herbs, others nothing at all. It was a meal designed to travel, to sustain through hard rides or long scouts across open plains. The bread, dense and flat, could last for days. The heart, once cooked, was chewy but nourishing. In colder months, the sandwich would be wrapped in hide and tucked into a satchel, staying warm for hours against the body. Today, buffalo heart is more likely to be seen as an oddity at a specialty butcher, the tradition forgotten or sanitized into restaurant novelty. But once, this sandwich told a story of strength, sacrifice, and survival, etched into every bite by hands hardened from the land. Peanut butter and raisin sandwiches were the quieter cousin of the peanut butter and jelly. Less flashy, less messy, but full of charm. Instead of jam, you pressed raisins into the peanut butter, dotting each slice of bread like a trail of edible Morse code. The texture was everything: the chew of the raisins, the creaminess of the peanut butter. It was a sandwich you had to work through slowly. No drips, no stains, just that steady balance of nutty and sweet. For some kids, it was a favorite. For others, it was a compromise when the jelly jar ran dry. But for those who grew up on it, the peanut butter and raisin sandwich was a comforting constant. It felt like an after-school snack dressed up for the lunchroom. You do not see it much anymore, replaced by snack packs and squeeze tubes, but in a simpler time, it was a staple. And every now and then, when you bite into that combination again, it takes you right back to linoleum floors, carton milk, and the gentle crinkle of wax paper. There is nothing tidy about a sloppy Joe, and that is the whole point. These school cafeteria icons had one mission: to hit like a flavor bomb and leave a trail behind. Tangy ground beef cooked with tomato paste, onions, and whatever seasoning the lunch lady felt like using that day. Scooped in a steaming pile onto soft hamburger buns that were usually a little too small. You would take one bite, and the filling would slide out the other side like it was trying to escape. Your hands? Covered. Your tray? A disaster. Your smile? Huge. They were sweet, salty, savory, and just chaotic enough to make lunch feel like a party. Even the name sounded like something you should not be allowed to say in class. Sloppy Joes were not reserved for fancy moments. They were served with plastic forks and half a chocolate milk carton. But they became legendary. Maybe it was because they tasted like comfort food mixed with rebellion. Or maybe it was just the fact that no one ever got through one without needing extra napkins. Either way, it earned its place in the Sandwich Hall of Fame. But what if I told you there was a sandwich out there that combined egg, gravy, and a hamburger bun, and somehow made it work? Number 26. The potted meat sandwich, Armour or Libby's, the little flat cans with the pull-tab lid. You spread the paste on white bread with a butter knife, and that was lunch. The ingredient list read like a riddle, and nobody looked at it twice. Potted meat cost a few cents a can, kept without refrigeration, and stretched across 2 or 3 sandwiches if you spread it thin enough. Workers carried it to the factory floor, to the field, to the construction site. The taste was salty and faintly metallic, and people either loved it or tolerated it because the alternative was nothing at all. It was survival food in a commercial label. Number 17. Tongue on rye with mustard. The slice was 1/4 of an inch thick, fanned across the rye in 3 overlapping pieces, topped with a smear of horseradish and a single round of yellow mustard. Beef tongue was cheap at the wholesale market on 14th Street, simmered for 4 hours with onions and bay leaves, peeled while still warm, and sliced cold on the bias. A tongue sandwich was 35 cents at Katz's in 1956. The flavor was rich and beefy, the texture more tender than brisket ever reached. The sandwich held its place on Jewish deli counters and corner luncheonettes through the late 70s. And then beef prices dropped. The immigrant generation aged out. The kids stopped ordering it. Katz's still serves it. Almost nobody else does. Your grandfather knew the rail cook by his first name, and the rail cook knew which mustard he wanted before he sat down. Potato salad sandwiches were the kind of meal that made perfect sense to grandparents, even if they surprise people now. Leftover potato salad never went to waste. It became a cool, creamy filling tucked between slices of bread, turning into something far richer than the cost behind it. The soft potatoes, the dressing, the crunch of onions or celery all blended into a hearty mixture that felt surprisingly complete. It tasted like a picnic you could hold in your hand, like summer afternoons and easy, familiar gatherings. Grandparents understood how to stretch food, and potato salad was one of those dishes that could go further than anyone expected. The sandwich was inexpensive, satisfying, and comforting in that quiet way their meals always were. They had a talent for turning yesterday's leftovers into something worth remembering, and this sandwich was one of their simplest successes. Number 15. The sorghum and butter biscuit. Sorghum molasses was the sweetener of the southern mountains long before white sugar became affordable. Families grew sorghum cane in small plots, cut it in the fall, and pressed the stalks through a horse-drawn mill. The juice ran into an evaporator pan set over a wood fire and cooked down into a thick, amber syrup with a flavor deeper and more complex than honey. You split a hot biscuit, spread butter on one side and a heavy pour of sorghum on the other, and pressed them together. The butter and the sorghum mixed into something rich and golden that ran down your fingers if you were not careful. Every country store in Kentucky and Tennessee sold sorghum in mason jars through the 1960s. Today it is a specialty item that costs $8 a jar. For 100 years, it was the cheapest sweet thing in the hills. In the South, a pineapple sandwich was not a joke. It was a real thing made by real women who saw nothing strange about laying a ring of canned Dole pineapple on a slice of white bread spread with Duke's mayonnaise. The tang of the fruit against the richness of the mayo was a flavor profile that made perfect sense to anyone who'd grown up eating sweet pickles on ham. That push and pull between sugar and fat was the whole architecture of Southern sandwich making. Some added a slice of American cheese, others sprinkled the pineapple with a little salt. The most committed version grilled it, letting the cheese melt and the pineapple caramelize until the kitchen smelled like a county fair griddle. It sounds impossible until you taste it, and then it sounds like your grandmother knew something about flavor balance that culinary school couldn't teach. The pineapple had to be canned. Fresh was too tart, too wet, too unpredictable. Control was part of the recipe. Turnip slice sandwiches were a simple way to add crunch and freshness without paying for expensive fillings. Housewives would peel turnips, slice them thinly, sprinkle with salt, and press them between bread slices. The result was sharp, crisp, and refreshing, offering a flavor somewhere between radish and cabbage. It was inexpensive and used a vegetable that grew well in many backyards, making it accessible to rural families. These sandwiches were not luxurious, but they provided texture and bulk when little else was available. Some versions included a thin spread of butter to soften the sharpness, but often the turnip was eaten plain. For many families, this was a reminder that survival meant working with whatever was on hand, even if it seemed humble. Children might not have been thrilled, but adults valued the practicality. Turnip slice sandwiches may sound unusual today, yet in the 1950s they were just another example of stretching resources and ensuring nothing went to waste. They embodied thrift in its simplest form. The hot dog split down the middle and broiled with cheese answered the question of what to do when the buns ran out or when someone wanted something hot without starting a whole production. A standard ballpark or Oscar Mayer cut lengthwise without going all the way through, the interior pressed open, a line of yellow mustard laid in, then a strip of American cheese folded into the groove. The whole thing slid under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and the hot dog skin tightened and split at the edges. Some households put it back in a bun afterward. Others served it without, the hot dog standing alone on the plate with the cheese pooled in the split. An open-faced situation that required a fork and constituted a real meal in the households that served it that way. Children learned which version their household made and understood the other version was wrong. The correct procedure was not a recipe, it was just how it was done. If the tongue sandwich required a butcher's skill, this one required nothing but nerve. Peanut butter and dill pickle on white bread, the sandwich that sounds like a dare but tastes like a discovery. It came out of the Depression when lunch counters paired whatever was cheap and shelf-stable, and the combination turned out to work in a way nobody expected. The New York Times called it a thrifty and unacknowledged American classic. The acid of vinegar brine cuts through the fat, the crunch of pickle breaks the density, and the whole thing hits a sweet, sour, salty balance that makes you take a second bite before you've understood the first. Pregnant women kept it alive for decades. The craving is practically a cliché. But this was a pantry staple long before anyone tied it to pregnancy. You don't need to be craving anything. You just need to trust the people who came before you. The turkey Devonshire was Pittsburgh's answer to comfort food sandwiches. It started with thick toast, usually white bread. Then came slices of roasted turkey, crispy bacon, tomato, and a hot cheese sauce. Poured on top and baked until bubbly. It was open-faced, served hot, and made you feel like you were eating something fancier than you actually were. It looked like it belonged on a diner plate under buzzing fluorescent lights. It was the kind of meal a tired father might throw together with leftover Thanksgiving turkey or deli slices. It was greasy. It was heavy. It stuck to your ribs. But it never left you hungry. It carried the mood of a city where winters were long, jobs were hard, and food needed to earn its keep. You might not have had the money for steak, but you could make this. And it tasted like someone tried. That was enough. Creativity in the kitchen was essential, and the cabbage and mustard sandwich was a perfect example of making the most out of minimal ingredients. Boiled cabbage, often considered a humble vegetable, was paired with a dollop of yellow mustard, creating a simple yet satisfying filling between two slices of white bread. The cabbage provided a soft, mild base, while the mustard added a tangy kick that brought everything together. It wasn't the most exciting sandwich, but it served a purpose. It stretched pennies while still providing enough sustenance to get through the day. This sandwich became a staple for many who needed something filling, affordable, and easy to prepare. While it may have been basic, it was all about keeping things regular and using what you had available. The simplicity of this meal made it a go-to for families during tough times. And though the combination of cabbage and mustard may seem unusual, it was a practical meal when other options were limited. But if you think this sandwich is a little too simple, wait until you hear about the next one, which brings a bit of sweetness to the table. The grapefruit. New Orleans contributes to the sandwich table as well, and it's got a classic, the muffaletta. This one originated in New Orleans, Louisiana, when Italian cuisine was on the rise. The sandwich is named after the round, Sicilian-style bread it's traditionally made with, known as muffuletta bread. It's typically a large sandwich, so every time Grandma made one, it was a whole feast. Plus, let's not forget the olive salad it was paired with. Talk about Italian cuisine at its finest. If you ever want to try the OG muffuletta, Central Grocery and Deli in New Orleans is credited for its creation. Yeah, it remains a must-visit spot for this iconic sandwich. Sunchoke and pine nut flatbread wraps were desert energy bars before energy bars existed. Sunchokes, those nutty, crunchy roots, were sliced thin, pan-roasted, and wrapped with toasted pine nuts inside maize flatbread. No sauce, no garnish, just sunlight turned into food. Southwest tribes used these for midday meals and travel snacks, giving bursts of energy without weighing the body down. Sunchokes, with their natural sweetness, paired perfectly with the buttery richness of pine nuts. The wrap was soft, earthy, and grounding. Nothing fancy, but everything thoughtful. You could walk all day with one of these in your satchel and still feel strong. Today, sunchokes are rediscovered only by chefs looking for obscure ingredients, while pine nuts are sold at luxury prices. The wrap? Gone. What was once survival food has become exotic. But there was nothing exotic about it when it kept you going through dry winds and endless miles. We did not call them superfoods. We just called them food. And that might be the biggest difference of all. If you were a regular at lunch counters in the 1970s, there was one cold cut that had a mysterious charm: pickle and pimento loaf. It had a look that was hard to ignore. A pale pink meat dotted with bright green pickle bits and tiny flecks of red pimento, like a mosaic made by someone who really loved sandwiches. It came sliced thin from behind the deli glass, slapped between white bread with a dab of mayonnaise, and wrapped in wax paper with a soda on the side. You did not question it. You just ate it. The flavor? Tangy, savory, and weirdly sweet, but not in a bad way. It had the texture of bologna, the bite of pickle, and the color scheme of a Christmas tree. For some reason, it vanished from most grocery shelves by the end of the decade. Maybe tastes changed, or maybe we just stopped putting pickles inside our meat. But back then, it was an easy go-to, a bit of fun, and a total conversation starter if you pulled it out during lunch break. Of course, if you thought that sandwich was messy looking, just wait until we dive into the one that was literally impossible to eat without getting sauce all over your hands and loving it. Back in the 1970s, vegetarian food was still finding its groove, but the zucchini and cheese melt was one of those quiet wins tucked away in the spiral-bound cookbooks of every mom who wanted something different. Start with sliced zucchini, sautéed in a bit of butter with onions, maybe some garlic or dried herbs if you were fancy. Cook it down until it is tender and fragrant. Then pile it onto a slice of whole wheat bread and smother it in shredded cheddar. Into the oven it went, broiled until the cheese bubbled and browned at the edges. This was not a salad disguised as a sandwich. It was hearty, warm, and full of flavor. The zucchini gave it body, the cheese gave it soul, and the bread held it all together like it was born for this. You did not miss the meat. That was the surprise. It was the kind of sandwich that popped up when the fridge looked empty, but your mom still made something work. It smelled like love and tasted like something healthier than it had any right to be. And while this one kept things wholesome, the next sandwich leaned full tilt into deli classics: meat, stuffing, and a layer of post-holiday leftovers you could eat any day of the year. Number 28, the mustard sandwich. Yellow mustard spread thick on white bread. That was the whole recipe. During the Depression, families who had run through everything else still had a jar of French's in the cupboard because mustard lasted forever and cost almost nothing. Children brought these to school wrapped in wax paper and ate them fast so nobody would see. It was the sandwich people made when they were too proud to ask for help and too hungry to skip a meal. Some added a slice of raw onion if one was left in the bin. That bite of heat and acid tricked the stomach into thinking it had received something real. It had not, but it got a person to supper time. Number 20, Underwood deviled ham on rye. Peeling back that red foil tin was the sound of a lunchbox opening from 1922 through about 1968. The tin held a paste of finely ground ham, mustard, vinegar, and spices that the William Underwood Company had been selling out of New England since 1868. You scooped 2 tablespoons onto rye, pressed a second slice on top, and cut diagonally. The tin had a small red devil on the label that had not changed in 50 years. It was the oldest registered trademark on a food product in the country. Mothers packed deviled ham sandwiches in metal pails for steel mill shifts and for school because the paste held up through a 6-hour day in any weather. But the kids called it pink mush by the 70s, and the doctors said the salt was too high. The deviled ham sandwich went to ground, and the small red devil on the tin became the only thing about it most Americans remembered. Ham salad sandwiches were the kind of thrift brilliance grandparents mastered without ever bragging about it. They would take leftover ham, chop it with practiced ease, and mix it with mayonnaise, relish, and a touch of mustard until it became a creamy, tangy blend that tasted like something from a small-town deli. Spread thick on soft bread, it felt like a proper lunch even though it came from scraps and habit. The smell of ham and relish filling the kitchen was enough to make anyone hungry, and the taste was always rich but never heavy, balanced even without a written recipe. Grandparents simply knew when it needed more relish or another spoonful of mayonnaise. Ham salad sandwiches tasted like comfort shaped by experience, a reminder that inexpensive food could still feel generous and deeply satisfying. They were born from frugality, but remembered as pure warmth. Number 13, the cracklin and cornbread sandwich. Cracklins are the crispy bits left over after you render hog fat into lard. Small, crunchy, and full of flavor, and in the mountains, people stirred them straight into cornbread batter before baking. The cracklins gave the cornbread a richness and a crunch that plain cornbread never had. You cut a square of cracklin cornbread, split it open, and ate it like a sandwich, sometimes with a smear of butter, sometimes with nothing at all. Hog killing day in late November produced pounds of cracklins, and the ones that did not go into the cornbread went into a jar on the counter for snacking. Nothing from that hog was wasted. The cracklin cornbread sandwich was the last stop on a chain that started with a living animal and ended with not a single scrap thrown away. Nobody under 40 knows what an olive and cream cheese sandwich is, but mention it to anyone who grew up in the 1960s or 70s and you'll get a story. The spread was simple: softened Philadelphia cream cheese, chopped green olives with the pimiento still in them, and just enough olive brine to loosen it up. Some families added pecans, others swore by walnuts. The whole thing went on crustless white bread, cut into triangles, and appeared at every baby shower, bridal luncheon, and bridge club meeting from Mobile to Minneapolis. The women who made it never used a recipe. They knew the ratio by the color of the spread: pale green with flecks of red, loose enough to smear but stiff enough to hold the bread together. One woman remembered eating her first one from a cooler in her grandmother's back seat during a road trip, and the taste, briny, creamy, cold from the ice, was the taste of every summer drive she ever took. The woman who packed that cooler has been gone for years. The sandwich went with her. Cold rice sandwiches were born out of pure necessity and resourcefulness in households that could not afford to let a single grain go to waste. Housewives in the 1950s would gather up leftover rice from the night before, stir it together with mayonnaise for a creamy texture or syrup when they needed sweetness, and spread the mixture thickly between slices of bread. It was filling, cheap, and required nothing more than what was already sitting on the kitchen shelf. Children often carried these sandwiches in their lunchboxes, not because they wanted them, but because that was what kept bellies full until dinner. The texture was unusual, with the rice grains giving a chewy bite, but the bread softened it into something manageable. Syrup versions leaned toward dessert while the mayonnaise versions leaned toward sustenance, showing how flexible one idea could become. It was a sandwich that never pretended to be glamorous, yet it provided quick fuel when times were lean. Cold rice sandwiches are almost forgotten today, but they carry the quiet reminder that survival in the 1950s kitchen was more about cleverness than choice. Before anyone questioned whether a frozen fish stick belonged between two slices of white bread, there was a generation of children who knew exactly how good it was. If the roast was Sunday and the gravy was Monday, the fish stick sandwich was Wednesday. Gorton's of Gloucester, Massachusetts, which introduced frozen fish sticks during the 1950s as part of the first wave of foods marketed during the television advertising boom, crispy and mild and completely acceptable to children who refused anything that smelled too strongly of the sea. Sticks baked until the coating cracked, transferred hot onto soft white bread with tartar sauce from a jar. The bread steamed slightly against the heat, which was the whole point. That warmth transferring through, making it part of the meal instead of just its container. These were after-school sandwiches, lunchbox sandwiches, the sandwiches of households where the freezer did serious work. They went quiet when families decided frozen fish sticks were beneath them. In every small-town grocery from the 1940s through the 70s, there was a tub of bologna salad behind the deli glass, right next to the pimento cheese. It started as mock ham salad during the Depression. Chopped grocery store bologna run through a hand grinder with hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, diced onion, and enough mayonnaise to hold it together. It fed families who couldn't afford actual ham but refused to send kids to school empty-handed. A pound of bologna cost a fraction of what ham ran, and ground up with the fixings, nobody at that lunch table knew the difference. In Detroit and across the Deep South, it became the thing itself. Mothers scooped it onto white bread with the confidence of women serving a holiday spread. The taste was salty, tangy, creamy, with pickle crunch holding it together. By the 80s, prepackaged meats pushed it out. But somewhere, someone is still grinding that bologna by hand. The McDLT was a burger with a gimmick that actually worked. McDonald's served it in a special two-sided foam container. One half had the hot patty and bottom bun. The other half had lettuce, tomato, cheese, pickles, and the top bun. The point was to keep the hot side hot and the cool side cool. You had to assemble it yourself. It felt fancy. It felt fun. You would peel back that lid like you were opening something futuristic. A burger with a strategy. The lettuce was still crisp. The tomato was not wilted. The burger was steaming. Then you folded it together and took a bite. It was fast food pretending to be thoughtful. It only lasted a few years in the 1980s before disappearing, partly because the packaging was not great for the environment. But for a while, dads on their lunch breaks or families in the station wagon would crack open that container and feel like they were part of the future, not just a burger, an experience in two halves coming together in one bite. Which takes the humble potato and turns it into something simple but delicious. Sometimes, simplicity is the best solution, and the boiled potato and butter sandwich is a perfect example. It's as basic as it gets. Boiled potatoes smashed onto bread with a generous spread of butter and a sprinkle of salt. It sounds simple, maybe even boring, but there's something about the soft, creamy texture of the potatoes combined with the richness of butter that makes this sandwich surprisingly satisfying. The potatoes were filling, cheap, and readily available, while the butter added a touch of luxury. It was the kind of meal that was comforting in its simplicity, especially when times were tough and money was tight. This sandwich was often enjoyed warm, making it all the more comforting on a cold day. And while it might not have been fancy, it tasted better than it sounds. But if you're in the mood for something a little more indulgent and messy, the next sandwich might be just what you're looking for. If you've ever walked the streets of downtown New York, I'm sure you're familiar with the infamous pastrami on rye. If your grandma's from the Big Apple, chances are her recipe is highly regarded. This sandwich became a staple in Jewish delis in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, thanks to Eastern European immigrants. This one just featured an old-fashioned slice of pastrami on rye bread and a dollop of mustard. Grandma knew that when it came to sandwiches, sometimes less is more, and pastrami on rye is the perfect example of that. But hey, don't forget no pastrami on rye is complete without a pickle on the side. The tartness of a dill pickle or the sweetness of a bread and butter pickle is the perfect contrast to the savory pastrami. Fry bread tacos with bison were once a communal crown jewel. golden, pillowy fry bread packed with seasoned bison meat, often shredded or pan-seared. This was not fast food. This was food that took time, skill, and sacred memory. You could smell the crisping dough from 100 feet away at community gatherings, powwows, or even just a family weekend. The bison brought not only nutrition but reverence, an animal that gave everything and once blanketed the plains. Back then, bison was hunted with care, shared without hesitation, and seasoned with more than salt. These tacos might have been topped with beans, chilies, or a scoop of sweet squash mash, wrapped in foil or corn husk for later. Today, fry bread survives mostly through carnival stands and powwow vendors, but its pairing with bison has quietly slipped away. Why? Some of it is cost, some of it is loss. Some of it is the fact that bison is no longer something families can just have. It has been pushed to novelty status. And fry bread, once born of government rations and survival, has been pulled into an uneasy spotlight. But if you ever had one of these tacos as a child, you remember the warmth. You remember that feeling of being full, for once, in more ways than one. In a time when food waste was practically unthinkable, even potato scraps found their way onto dinner tables as an ingenious sandwich filling known as the fried potato peel sandwich. During the Great Depression, resourcefulness wasn't just admired, it was essential for survival. Potato peels, typically discarded today without a second glance, became the surprise stars of family meals when frugal cooks discovered that frying them crisp and sprinkling a touch of salt transformed kitchen waste into an affordable delicacy. Potatoes were abundant, inexpensive, and nutritious, making them a cornerstone of Depression-era cooking. Yet their peels often held valuable nutrients, something homemakers recognized instinctively, long before modern nutritionists praised potato skins as vitamin-packed. Clever cooks stretched resources by saving these peelings, crisping them to crunchy perfection, and layering them between slices of bread for a sandwich that was satisfying, flavorful, and, importantly, dirt cheap. Remarkably, newspapers and food columns of the 1930s openly suggested frying potato peels to add bulk and nutrition to scarce diets, turning desperation into culinary inspiration. In Depression-era kitchens, yesterday's breakfast porridge could become today's lunch sandwich, thanks to an inventive approach known as the oatmeal patty sandwich. Resourceful homemakers combined leftover oatmeal with chopped onion and simple seasonings, shaping them into patties fried crisp in skillets. While oatmeal today is primarily breakfast food, during the 1930s, it was promoted as an affordable pantry essential, stretching limited budgets due to its low cost and nutritional value. Housewives jokingly remarked oatmeal's versatility was unmatched. It could feed you at dawn, reappear at noon, and somehow still taste different each time. Historical cooking guides enthusiastically recommended oatmeal patties as mock meat alternatives, cleverly imitating sausage texture without the expense of actual meat. Adding onions, readily available from backyard gardens or root cellars, provided flavor and depth, elevating simple oatmeal from bland necessity into something surprisingly satisfying. Once crisped in a skillet, these patties became sandwich-ready, easily slipped between slices of bread and served hot, making oatmeal suddenly exciting, words rarely uttered together. Number 30. The sugar sandwich. 2 slices of white bread, a thin layer of butter, and a heavy sprinkling of granulated sugar folded shut. That was it. In homes across the Midwest and the Deep South, this was what children ate after school when the pantry held nothing else worth eating. The butter kept the sugar from spilling out. Some families used brown sugar instead. Others added cinnamon if they had it, which turned it into something that almost felt like dessert. But this was not dessert. This was the meal between meals, the thing that kept a child quiet until supper was on the table. Mothers made them without thinking. Children ate them without complaining, and the whole thing cost less than a penny. Number 22. Welsh rarebit on toast. The sauce was the whole sandwich. Sharp cheddar melted with milk, beer, dry mustard, and a few drops of Worcestershire, poured thick over a slab of toasted white loaf and slid under the broiler until the top went gold. You could eat it with a fork. The lunch rail kept a small saucepan of it warm and stirred. A trucker could order Welsh rarebit, eat it like a hot lunch with coffee, and be on the road by 1/4 past. The sandwich required a real sauce, and the sauce required someone behind the rail who could pay attention. As the counters moved to faster food, Welsh rarebit was the earliest item to vanish from the slate. Nobody was asking for it anyway. Sardine and mustard sandwiches were the bold, fearless meals grandparents made when they wanted flavor, nutrition, and thrift. All at once, sardines came in tins that waited on the pantry shelf like hidden treasures. Salty and tender with enough natural oil to feel restaurant-rich, grandparents mixed them with mustard, sometimes adding onions or a splash of vinegar, and spread the mixture with the confidence of someone making a seafood cafe special. And honestly, it tasted like it belonged there. Sardines had that deep, briny flavor that made the sandwich feel worldly and far more expensive than it was. These meals filled you up and stayed in your memory long after, teaching you something about trying foods that looked humble but tasted big. Grandparents valued strong flavors, meals that woke you up and proved that good food was about skill, not money. Sardine and mustard sandwiches were a small act of boldness and a thrifty masterpiece. The fatback biscuit. Fatback is the slab of pure fat cut from the back of a hog, no meat in it at all. You sliced it thin, fried it in a dry skillet until it rendered and turned golden, then laid those crispy slices inside a split buttermilk biscuit. The grease that came out of the fatback went right back onto the biscuit. This was a working man's breakfast in the mountains of North Carolina and Virginia from the early 1900s through the 1960s. Loggers and miners ate it because the fat kept you full through a 10-hour shift when nothing else would. Nobody pretended it was health food. It was fuel, pure and simple, and it cost almost nothing because fatback was the cheapest cut the butcher sold. Now, the peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich sounds like a dare until you learn it fed half the South during the Depression. Newspapers in the 40s printed instructions for mixing the two into a spreadable consistency, enough peanut butter for heft, enough mayo for moisture, and slathering it across whatever bread was cheapest. The combination packed fat and protein into a single meal that cost almost nothing, and for families stretching $1 past its breaking point, that arithmetic mattered more than flavor. But the thing nobody expected, it tasted good. The salt in the peanut butter leaned into the tang of the mayonnaise, and the texture, dense, slick, heavy on the tongue, stayed with you through a full afternoon of work. Mothers passed it to daughters who passed it to their own kids, and by the 70s it had outlived the poverty that created it. People ate it because they wanted to, not because they had to. That shift, from necessity to choice, was the quiet victory of a sandwich nobody bragged about making. Graham cracker peanut butter sandwiches were a creative way to turn a dessert cracker into a dependable meal. Housewives would crumble or crush graham crackers into peanut butter, creating a thick, sticky paste that stretched further than peanut butter alone. Spread on bread, this filling provided both sweetness and protein, making it practical and satisfying. Children loved the sweet crunch, while parents valued how far one jar of peanut butter could go when mixed with the crackers. It was especially useful when peanut butter supplies were limited, since the crackers bulked out the mixture without losing flavor. The sandwich was heavy, chewy, and packed with energy, perfect for keeping kids going through the school day or fathers through long hours of work. It did not look fancy, but it filled stomachs and kept families fed when choices were limited. Graham cracker peanut butter sandwiches are rarely remembered today, yet in the 1950s they showed how even snack foods could be adapted into survival meals. The Western egg sandwich lived in the middle ground between breakfast and lunch that the 1970s always seemed full of. Scrambled eggs cooked with diced ham, green bell pepper, and white onion, just set enough to hold together, spooned onto thick white bread or a Kaiser roll while still warm. The story involves railroad workers heading west through Denver, the ham and eggs as portable protein, the peppers as whatever grew nearby, and whether accurate or not, it became a short-order counter-staple through the post-war decades, appearing on coffee shop menus from Ohio to Oregon without explanation. Your grandmother made it on Saturday mornings when the eggs needed to be used, She never called it a Denver sandwich. She called it eggs with the leftover ham. You haven't made it since she stopped cooking. The lettuce and mayonnaise sandwich is the one nobody wants to talk about. Iceberg lettuce, mayonnaise, salt and pepper, white bread. That was the whole thing. Depression-era cookbooks listed it as an economical lunch, and homemaking magazines through the 50s still called it refreshing. But the truth underneath the polite language was simpler. This was the sandwich you made when there was genuinely nothing else. No meat, no cheese, no eggs. Just the crack of cold lettuce and the tang of mayo on bread a day old. The women who served it didn't call it hardship. They set the plate down and ate the same thing without comment. That silence was its own grace, the refusal to let your kids see what you were carrying. The lettuce and mayo sandwich was never about the lettuce. It was about the hands that made it when nothing was left. The Spam sandwich was once a lunchtime savior in lean times, born in the shadow of World War II and fed to generations of hungry kids and working parents. Just slice up a brick of Spam, fry it till golden and crisp on the edges, and sandwich it between two slices of bread. Sometimes mustard showed up, maybe a slice of cheese or a ring of pineapple if someone was feeling tropical, but most of the time, it was just Spam and white bread, eaten hot or cold. It was salty, savory, and always dependable. People loved it or hated it, but either way, it showed up at the table. In Hawaii, Spam sandwiches became something of an art form, embraced with pride and seasoned with local flair. In the mainland, they were often a holdover from tighter times, a cheap protein fix that filled the belly fast. For those who remember it, the Spam sandwich is a symbol of resilience, food that lasted even when the paycheck didn't. Sometimes a quick and simple solution was needed when the month's budget was running low. Enter the cold hot dog slices and ketchup sandwich. This sandwich was made with leftover hot dogs, sliced cold, and slathered with ketchup between slices of bread. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, easy to make, and comforting. After payday, people might have splurged on hot dogs, but by the end of the week, those leftovers would be repurposed into this quick fix. The cold hot dog slices were nothing more than a vehicle for the ketchup, but when combined with bread, it made a satisfying snack or lunch. There wasn't much finesse to it, but it worked. It might not win any culinary awards, but when you've got limited resources, you make do with what you have. And while this sandwich may seem like an odd pairing, it's definitely one you'd want to try if you're in need of a last-minute meal. However, if you're craving something a little heartier, the next sandwich might just be what you're looking for. Florida was known for its delicious sandwiches, and grandmas in the Sunshine State were masters at making the Cuban sandwich. It was brought to the States by Cuban immigrants and instantly became the talk of the town in Tampa and Miami. Traditionally, Cuban sandwiches were pressed in a sandwich press, or plancha, which gave them their distinctive crispy crust. Grandma knew the secret to a great Cuban sandwich was in the press. The sandwich had to be pressed just right, so that the bread was crispy and the cheese melted, but the inside was still warm and full of flavor. There's even a special day to celebrate this sandwich. National Cuban Sandwich Day is celebrated on August 23rd each year. Make sure to mark your calendars. Cactus fruit and cornmeal sliders were the roadside miracle of the Southwest. Bright, spiced cactus fruit mashed and served inside thick patties made from masa. They were tangy, sweet, and just a little spicy. No two batches were ever the same. The cactus fruit, also called prickly pear, was roasted or boiled and sometimes mixed with chili or smoke-dried herbs. The cornmeal was turned into cakes or buns, fried golden on the outside and steaming inside. These sliders were eaten cold during treks, packed in wrapped leaves or thin cloth. The sugars gave energy. The corn kept the body going. They looked simple, but they were carefully balanced survival meals. Now, cactus fruit is made into candy or cocktail syrup. The cornmeal sliders? Replaced by frozen buns and fast food slogans. These sandwiches were not designed for flavor alone. They were made for movement, for endurance, for life in the dry and open spaces. And when we stopped walking the same roads, we stopped making the same food. What else have we let dry up? The patty melt was not just a sandwich, it was a lifestyle. It belonged to truck stops, corner booths, and places where the waitress calls you hon. Start with a beef patty, not too thick, not too thin, grilled until the edges charred just enough. Then pile on caramelized onions so sweet they practically melt, and drop a couple of slices of Swiss cheese on top until it oozes over like lava. But the crown jewel? That rye bread, buttered and toasted right on the griddle. It soaked up everything. The beefy drippings, the onion sweetness, the crispy edges of the cheese. Every bite was a perfect mix of crunchy and gooey, salty and buttery. You were not just eating a sandwich, you were biting into pure diner energy. People had this at lunch and still talked about it at dinner. If your parents ever made this at home, you were one of the lucky ones. And if not, you probably still remember your first time trying one and realizing a sandwich could actually stop time. But not every sandwich needed to be hot off the grill. Some came cold, weirdly fancy, and straight from the pages of a church cookbook. Imagine being 8 years old and opening your lunchbox to find chopped olive and cream cheese on pumpernickel. Either your mom was ahead of her time, or she found an old cocktail recipe card and just went with it. This sandwich was salty, tangy, creamy, and somehow kind of grown up. You had green olives chopped so fine they could sneak into your taste buds before your brain caught on, mixed with cream cheese until it was a spread so thick it stuck to the knife like it had a mission. All of that smeared onto a slice of deep, dark pumpernickel that practically demanded you respect it. It was not flashy, it was not sweet, and no kid was trading their cookie for it. But it had an edge, the kind of flavor that got better the more you chewed. Somewhere along the way, this party appetizer snuck into lunchboxes, Tupperware, and even a few kitchen counters at 2 in the morning. It was strange, but it made sense. The 70s were weird like that. Spreads were suddenly sandwiches and finger food was fair game. Of course, if you thought cold spreads were wild, wait until you see what happens when tuna salad goes face to face with a broiler. Number 20. The head cheese sandwich. Sliced head cheese on rye bread with mustard or horseradish. Head cheese was made from the head of a pig, simmered for hours until the meat fell apart, then pressed into a loaf with the natural gelatin holding everything together. Butcher shops sold it by the slice, and German, Polish, and Czech families across the Midwest ate it cold on sandwiches for lunch. The texture was firm, with bits of meat suspended in clear jelly. Most people today would not touch it. But when nothing from the animal went unused, head cheese was a practical way to use parts that had no other place to go. Number 25. Egg salad on white. Spreading egg salad using the rounded side of a spoon was the very first lesson a new waitress got at the rail. Knives were not allowed for this. 4 hard-boiled eggs, 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise, a pinch of celery salt, and a paper-thin slice of green pepper if you felt fancy. The bread was always white, always sliced thin, like a paper napkin folded around the filling. Waitresses cut sandwiches into triangles and stacked them on plates lined with leaf lettuce, eaten standing at the rail in under 11 minutes. The dime store counters quietly closed. The drugstore lunchrooms closed. The sandwich went with them. Your grandmother could still make one by feel. Most of her grandchildren cannot. Cheese sandwiches were the kind of quiet elegance grandparents brought to the table without ever calling it fancy. They would slice cucumbers thin enough to catch the light and spread cream cheese on soft bread with a steadiness that made it feel like a small treat. The cool crunch mixing with the creamy layer created a sandwich that tasted refreshing and clean. The sort of thing you might expect at a tea room even though you were sitting in a modest kitchen. Grandparents knew how to elevate simple ingredients, turning inexpensive food into something that felt peaceful and a little indulgent. When you bit into it, the crisp cucumber and smooth cream cheese made you feel like you were eating something far more expensive than it was. They used what they had and somehow made it memorable. These sandwiches tasted like calm afternoons, slow summers, and the steady comfort of people who knew how to make life feel gentle even when it was not. Number 10. The mustard sandwich. 2 slices of white bread and yellow mustard. That is the whole recipe. There is nothing else to add. This was what you ate when there was genuinely nothing left in the house, and it showed up on tables across the rural South more often than anyone wants to admit. The mustard gave you flavor and the bread gave you something to chew, and together they carried you through to the next meal. Dolly Parton has talked openly about growing up on mustard sandwiches in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. It was not a quirky family tradition. It was the bottom of the barrel, and families who lived on it knew exactly what it meant. There is no way to romanticize a mustard sandwich. It was hunger with a condiment on it, and pretending otherwise dishonors the people who survived on it. McCall's Great American Recipe Card Collection dropped this one on America in 1973, and the nation has been trying to forget it ever since. You mashed a ripe banana with minced ham, spread the mixture on buttered white bread, and served it cold. A variation in Florence Cowell's 1001 Sandwiches suggested sautéing banana slices and layering them on hot toast with deviled ham. The logic was not entirely insane. Sweet fruit and salty cured meat had a long tradition, and the Hawaiian pizza was doing fine. But something about mashing the two into a paste crossed a line that even the 70s couldn't defend. Kids who found this in their lunchboxes developed trust issues. Mothers who made it insisted it was delicious and could never explain why they stopped. The recipe card itself, with its bright photograph and cheerful instructions, became a punchline. Proof that the decade that gave us fondue sets and waterbed mattresses also tried to put banana in a ham sandwich and call it lunch. Vinegar sugar sandwiches were one of the more unusual yet memorable examples of thrift cooking. Bread was brushed with vinegar to give it sharpness, then sprinkled with sugar to balance it out, creating a sweet-sour bite that was unlike anything else. It was cheap, quick, and used ingredients that nearly every kitchen already had on hand. Children often enjoyed the sweetness, though the vinegar's tang sometimes divided opinions. Housewives turned to this when there was nothing else to put between slices of bread, proving how creativity and necessity shaped everyday meals. The vinegar soaked into the bread, softening it while the sugar added a crunchy texture on top. It may not have been filling compared to meat or vegetables, but it gave families a sense of variety when choices were limited. Vinegar sugar sandwiches are rarely remembered today, but they once carried the taste of both struggle and survival in kitchens across the country. The chicken salad sandwich with red grapes changed the moment it arrived on a croissant. Before that, it had always been a sensible thing: poached chicken pulled fine, celery cut thin, mayonnaise enough to hold it. But croissants were new. Pepperidge Farm introduced them to American supermarkets in the early 1970s, and the effect on the ladies' lunch circuit was immediate. Suddenly, chicken salad had a vessel worthy of its ambitions. The grapes were the decade's addition, sweet against the savory, their juiciness cutting through the richness of the mayo and the slight chew of cold chicken. It appeared at bridal showers, bridge luncheons, church women's auxiliaries, anywhere food was meant to be presented rather than simply eaten. Cutting the croissant was the whole event: the flake of the pastry, the way it compressed slightly under the knife. The women who made these sandwiches made them the same way every time. You knew it was hers before you saw whose plate it came from. If you've never tried a raw onion sandwich, it's one of those meals that'll stick with you, for better or worse. Sliced raw onions, slathered with a bit of mustard or mayo, tucked between two slices of bread. It wasn't gourmet, but it was a working man's lunch that packed a punch. Onions were cheap, easy to store, and filled you up. The mustard or mayo added some tang and creaminess, but the star of the show was the onion. Not only was it a strong-flavored, inexpensive option, but it was also a great way to keep your hunger at bay until your next meal. Though its pungent scent often lingered long after the meal was finished, it didn't matter when food was scarce. For many families, raw onion sandwiches were a quick fix that provided the sustenance they needed to get through the day. But if you think this is as bold as it gets, just wait until you hear about the next sandwich. Sandwich sandwich is what happens when you need dinner in 10 minutes and your pantry has exactly 2 ingredients: a can of manwich sauce and a pound of ground beef. It's the store-bought shortcut to a sloppy Joe, soaked in sweet, tangy tomato sauce and ready to heap on a hamburger bun. No chopping, no spice rack, no slow simmer. Just brown the beef, pour the can, and you're done. In the 70s and 80s, it became a weeknight hero, advertised as A sandwich is a sandwich, but a manwich is a meal. It was a dinner-time fix for busy parents, latchkey kids, and anyone with a microwave and a spoon. The smell alone could draw kids out of their bedrooms like moths to a flame. Some added cheese, others pickles or onions, but most just kept it simple. It wasn't glamorous, but it got the job done. Today, it still holds a place in the hearts of those who remember TV trays, linoleum kitchens, and the clink of a can opener on a Tuesday night. If you've ever had an egg salad sandwich, you might think you know what's coming with the chopped egg and vinegar sandwich. But this isn't your average egg salad. Instead of the usual mayonnaise, this sandwich relied on vinegar or mustard to give the eggs that tangy kick. Hard-boiled eggs were chopped up, mixed with the vinegar or mustard, and spread between 2 slices of bread. It wasn't the most luxurious meal, but it was cheap, filling, and had a sharp, tangy flavor that worked wonders. It was a makeshift egg salad, but it did the job when you needed something simple and satisfying. The vinegar or mustard added just enough zing to make the sandwich stand out. And while this might have been a favorite for some, the next sandwich is all about taking those beans you've got left over and turning them into something great. Here's another French classic that's a bit different from the rest of the sandwiches on the list. The Monte Cristo sandwich is a variation of the French croque monsieur. In simpler terms, it's a classic grilled ham and cheese sandwich. To make a great Monte Cristo, the sandwich had to be fried just right, and unlike most, this was dipped in egg batter and fried. The name was inspired by Alexandre Dumas' novel The Count of Monte Cristo, and this gave it a luxurious touch. If you have French ancestors, you likely have fond memories of eating this at family brunches. Three Sisters pocket flatbreads were the closest thing to soul food that the soil itself ever gave. Inside a warm flatbread pocket went a mash of squash, beans, and corn, the Three Sisters of traditional native agriculture. They were not just ingredients, they were family. Grown together, harvested together, and eaten together. The flatbread was made from maize flour or leftover mash from the harvest, cooked hot and fast on stone or clay. The inside could be creamy or chunky depending on the cook, and was often flavored with wild garlic or chili. Children would eat them running. Elders would eat them slowly. They were warm, golden, and grounding. But they are almost entirely gone now, replaced by mass-produced breads and flavorless substitutions. You can still find the Three Sisters on school posters or in museums, but not folded into a meal you can hold in your hand. We broke apart what was always meant to stay together, and in doing so, we lost not just nutrition, but balance. Who decided we did not need to eat this way anymore? And what else have we unlearned because of it? Bologna and potato salad sandwiches were just as effective at getting the entire family on the table and doubling as the perfect school lunch for your kid. Grade 5 or high school, none of that mattered, because even adults well into their career enjoyed these. People working long jobs would pack a bologna and potato salad sandwich in their backpack to ensure all their food needs were met. Often, you would come into a home around the afternoon and find kids glued to the TV with a bologna and potato salad sandwich in hand. Mixing in some chicken chunks or chips would only upgrade an already stellar dish, and we definitely want potato salads and this sandwich to make a comeback. Exotic fruits like bananas became virtually unattainable luxuries during the economic hardships of the 1930s, prompting desperate yet brilliant substitutions from ordinary American pantries. Enter the mock banana sandwich, cleverly disguising boiled mashed parsnips sweetened with sugar and a dash of artificial banana flavoring. Parsnips, previously overlooked root vegetables that thrived in backyard gardens, found unexpected stardom in this culinary sleight of hand. Housewives quickly realized their earthy taste softened when boiled, making them surprisingly receptive to imitation fruit flavors. Banana extract, once used sparingly in desserts, was suddenly celebrated for turning humble parsnips into a believable tropical treat. It's ironic that parsnips were elevated from root cellar obscurity to sandwich fame simply because real bananas became too costly for most American tables. Historical records show these sandwiches appeared regularly in Depression-era cookbooks, praised as creative alternatives that allowed families to maintain dietary variety despite limited budgets. Of course, modern taste buds might question whether parsnips truly captured the banana experience. After all, impersonating fruit is tough business. But many Depression-era children reportedly enjoyed the illusion enough to ask for seconds. The bread was always the cheapest part. What made those sandwiches worth remembering was the person standing at the counter putting them together. If a sandwich on this list brought back a kitchen you have not thought about in years, leave their name in the comments. Share this with someone who grew up on the same bread, and if you have not subscribed yet, this is a good time. There is plenty more where this came from.